Alizai stands amidst the scattered aftermath of the raid. The guards drag away the last slave traders, quietly counting. There were almost 30 in total. He exhales, throws his hand behind his head, and turns to the dark corner where the most vulnerable victims are kept. He fixes his gaze on the ground where small, hunched figures crowd together. 5 young girls, including a little elf, look back at him with empty, silent eyes. Their thin white shirts barely cover their bodies, and they have neither warmth nor dignity left. They tremble convulsively, curled up together hoping to catch even a drop of relief. The trauma from that hour of trials is frozen forever on their youthful features, and the silence sounds crueler than any scream. When he shortens the distance, they flinch and begin searching for words as if those could calm their fear. He freezes in place, only then do they realize the cold, devastating truth. But as soon as he leaves and hands them over to the authorities, these people will again fall into the clutches of another traitor. They stare at how his hand grips the sword hilt. He asks a question: why does he need strength if not to protect those who cannot stand up for themselves? He disarms the guard, gives a warm, sincere smile, and slowly raises his hands, showing no ill intent. He whispers as if assuring everything, promises he is not a bad adult, and says he will take care of them himself. He stares at how they lift their heads. The fear on their faces immediately dissolves, and a fragile, unstable hope ignites within him. They fix their gaze on the man who just returned their future, the very same that a moment ago seemed irretrievably lost. Soon they intercept him and hurry him to a modest house in a quiet village. He gets to work and begins to support them. While the girls examine their new, safe surroundings, he fetches fresh clothes for them. The shadow of their past gradually recedes. He immerses himself in the domestic routine and takes on the role of protector. In the kitchen, confidently as if following notes, he tosses food into the pan and the girls eagerly watch and immediately join the work. They act together. One kneads dough, another cleans up the mess, and the smallest girl, unable to contain her admiration, mimics his movements with a wooden sword. Determination burns in her eyes. As days quietly turn into weeks, he launches their formal training program in the forest, standing motionless among them all, even and straight, as if freshly driven into the ground. He reviews and adjusts stances while they, gripping wooden training swords, improve their positions. Each girl watches him intently and, copying his pose, sharpens the basic self-defense steps under his watchful eye. After an especially successful session, he gently extends his hand to the blonde girl and softly strokes her head, silent approval. She lights up with a smile from the praise, while the others just watch. The supportive thumbs up boosts their confidence, and the tension between them turns into a close bond. 5 years pass so quickly, as if each heartbeat compresses time, and the same little ones grow into skilled young women. He sits silently at the table, but as soon as the door opens, a whole flock bursts in. They rush at him together and overwhelm him with huge hugs, almost pulling him off the chair. He grunts quietly, feeling their combined weight, mutters something about them becoming too heavy, yet despite the noise and chaos, a barely noticeable smile trembles on his lips. And the moment comes when each of them must forge their own path, so they gather together one last time to express sincere, deep gratitude. In new travel, Girob's armor and cloaks the offer thanks for life and the skills he gave them from the day they were saved. One of them fixes her gaze on the sword she now carries and wonders about its purpose, and all in the end make a promise to carry his teachings in their hearts when the time comes to depart. With the last waves of farewell cries and joyful shouts, they step onto the road. A whole flock of travelers and order him to hold on and take care of himself. He stands on the outskirts of the village and desperately waves back at them until their figures dissolve, turning into shadows against the horizon. His chest tightens with pride for the women they have become. Tisha steps over the threshold and freezes in place, staring at the sky. The bright sun floods everything around and its rays filter through the trees. He plunges into the emptiness of thoughts. But suddenly a voice, painfully familiar, calls his name again, and Aganan, this silence is shattered, pulling him back from the haze. Silent memory cracks and crumbles as a huge grumbling bear lunges straight at it, claws forward, a roar cuts the air. At that very moment an urgent cry breaks out. Wake up, and it immediately becomes clear. The former silence no longer exists, replaced by deadly, instant danger. He lets out a heavy, exhausted sigh, and the sleep that has not yet risen gets trapped in his head like morning fog. At that very moment the fragment shatters and scatters completely. A giant fur-covered creature lunges forward, but it is sharply stopped by a quick, precise strike from a young woman. The man closely tracks every movement, meticulously checks her stance, and emphasizes that she must not hold back. Let her strike with full force, even if the creature before her is of such scale. As soon as the threat was averted, she sharply turns to him, and bowing low, performs an official apology ceremonious, if because of her own defeat and helplessness. He brushed off her worries with a short wave of his hand and a tired smile, but honestly accepted. The guilt lies with himself. His own slowness pushed everything to that dangerous edge. As soon as the blade disappeared into the sheath, a recurring dream flashed in his mind about 5 girls he once raised. And this scene presses one question into his thoughts again. why the nightmare does not retreat. When he acknowledges her achievements, her gaze flashes with genuine surprise and pure joy. She freezes as he reaches forward to stroke her head, a fatherly gesture that immediately brings a blush to her cheeks, and she literally bathes in his rare approval. When they finally return to the village, a silence falls upon it that he has been gathering within himself for 5 years, since the day the girls went their separate ways. In this solitude, he truly lived all his present, teaching the local youth the basics of survival. Yet despite everything, he still remains a person carved by his past, an ordinary wanderer in a dead end of the world, while his former pupils make a name for themselves far from here. The mood suddenly shifts the other way when she sharply grabs his sleeve. Her voice wavers on every word as she rejects his hints, as if she is already able to protect the village herself. She insists her training is not yet finished, and his despair is evident in how she never lets him out of sight and holds on to him as if he has no right to become unnecessary. Tears well up in her eyes as soon as she finally names aloud the fear that was eating him from the inside. One suspicion haunts her. He is going to leave the village forever and cut off everything left behind. She sharply raises her gaze in from shock. She even catches her breath when he gently clasps her palm in his. He almost doesn't sound, quietly calls her name and notes how much she has grown. Then he praises her performance during the recent monster hunt and confidently says that from now on she will be able to protect the village on her own. He continues to lay everything out clearly. His own body has softened, become deaf to the slow, measured rhythm of rural life, so now he will have to return to training from the very beginning. She responds dryly and without the right to reconsider. Her voice cuts off all doubts. She clearly understands the decision has already been made and his opinion will change nothing. Without any additional words, she closes the distance, breaks away, snatches herself free and disappears into the thickets. And he calls her name and the very air seems to freeze for a moment as she finally vanishes from sight. Levin holds his position unwaveringly, sword raised, gaze fixed, and he orders Ali Zai to fight with full force. She desperately tries to show she has grown up, begging him not to hold back for the sake of the whole village. Levin draws the sword from its sheath and his stone face meets her challenge without any softness. She lunged forward with a piercing scream, each step burning with a desperate need to justify his hopes and bury painful memories of those they failed to save. He easily parried her attack precisely without any strain. While she pours her soul into the duel, his gaze relentlessly follows every move she makes. In a calm tone, he lays everything out clearly. Fencing is not just about waving a blade, especially when you are facing a person, not an animal, and he immediately makes it clear that how you hold the fight and your fighting spirit depends on who your opponent is. Their blades clash and he immediately sharply analyzes her stance. Weak grip, restless footwork. She clenches her teeth and stubbornly insists she won't stop until she becomes strong enough to take down any monster, refusing to accept his last advice as the final word of training. Despite her stubbornness, her body suddenly fails. Her legs twitch and tremble from excessive strain after exhausting heavy training. She stumbles, the sword slips from her hands, but he instantly catches her, not allowing her to fall to the ground. He presses her tightly against the place, muffling his voice as he places the village's safety in her hands, saying he can fully rely on her. She must protect the people from monsters, but as soon as the responsibility rests on her shoulders, the burden instantly takes her breath away and she freezes with wide-open eyes. Later that same evening, the forest falls silent as he approaches the small cabin. He does not release the tension of the whole day still felt in the cold air. He sits down and silently sinks into thought. Through the trunks, the moonlight pours in thin stripes as he prepares to spend the evening quietly. He sits next to the village elder who quietly recounts. After their session, Levin simply could not hold back tears. The elder explains for the girl whose parents were taken by monsters, he became a fatherly support, gave her a new reason to hold on and even taught her how to use a sword. He did not move from his place and informed the village elder he would set off the next morning. The old woman looked at him and asked if he would really dare with so much in his heart. He just quietly bowed his head and apologized, his gaze remaining fixed on the path ahead. Catching his resolute tone, she immediately warned, a young girl might dare to follow him secretly. This revelation knocked him off his feet. He sharply widened his eyes in shock as soon as he realized how deeply she was attached to him and what trouble she could bring upon herself. Under the quiet moonlight, he remained alone and sat staring into emptiness. Inside, waves of thoughts pressed about the burden of his own departure and the warning given by the elder. Eventually, he yielded to these doubts and agreed to meet Lewin once more before setting off on the journey. As soon as morning came, the young girl rushed forward and fell into his arms. Her composure immediately melted as soon as she pressed against him. He felt a tremor run through her. Her silent pain spoke louder than any words. Tears choked her and she, gasping, begged him. Why must he leave? And on the contrary, asked him to stay. He stood over her, looking down, and in that gaze lived cruel torment, for he was trying to find words to divert the explanation about the fate he himself would have to face. He whispered her name and she automatically raised her eyes. Tears shimmered in her gaze, at first red rims around the eyes, then an uncontrollable, desperate hope. She seemed to be waiting for any sign so that this would not turn into a farewell forever. Pressing his hand to his side, he drew his blade and thrust it forward, stepping toward him. In the ray gleamed cold steel as he prepared to give her his most precious treasure. He said that this sword was given to him as a gift from his own master, and as soon as he hands the blade to her, his silent vow will sound. After that, he promised, he would return immediately after completing what he set out for in his journey, leaving her the burden of duty and a trembling hope for future meetings. At the edge of the village he froze, and the weight of departure hangs in the air, suspended above the ground. From that first moment when he set off on the road, 10 years have passed, and now a new promise is born, to return in another 10 years and gaze intently at how everyone has changed without him. The girls he once saved press close to each other in the frame, their faces glowing with hope as they solemnly vow to bring him back again, this time with even greater pride. Levin, meanwhile, does not take his eyes off the sword in her hands. Every word of her promise palpably presses on her chest as the full power of their past rolls through his memory. He drinks in her gaze at the corners of her lips, a barely noticeable teasing smile trembles and asks if she can simply erase from memory the agreement they have just signed, ahead for many years. She reacts sharply and piercingly to the very proposal. Her voice rises in fierce stubborn assurance, as if she would wait for decades if necessary. The very thought of forgetting is unbearable to her, a grievance she will not let go of. And every time she scolds him, she grips the blade's hilt tighter for daring to doubt her results at all. Seeing how she suffers, he reaches out to her and gently wipes away a tear flowing from her straight ear with the tip of his thumb. Calmly, he says he must keep his promise to everyone and asks her not to cry while he is about to leave. He says she should be sent off on her final journey not with muted sorrow, but with a smile. He wishes for joy to live in his memories of her, so whenever he travels and just immerses himself in thoughts of her, her bright, radiant face appears before his eyes, not distorted by tears. She takes a deep breath and, pressing the sword to her chest, forces herself to give a dazzling, tear-stained smile. At the end, one more quiet yes, and she promises to wait for his return, no matter how long it takes, holding his weapon as if it were a sacred trust. When he finally turns around and walks away, the whole village gathers in one place to watch as his silhouette dissolves somewhere in the distance. Lewin stands in the very heart of the crowd, guarding his own word and his steadfastness. He stares at him until the figure turns into a tiny speck on the horizon. He stands on the edge of a windy cliff and stares into the boundless, spread-out horizon. In his thoughts, the vow he made flares up again, a strict oath to reunite with those he left behind. Among them is Akin, a fierce warrior. Her image still lingers in his memory as he prepares for the long journey, firmly determined to keep his promise. While he travels, his old acquaintances, the women, have already paved their paths without him. Nina, the stoic mage, Aisha, the wild shield maiden, and Mia, who preserved silence and grace, all of them remained in the world he left behind. And among them, Lil Yun, an elf he once saved, briefly interrupts her duties. Her thoughts stubbornly fly to the man who once turned her life upside down, and they break into calculations, where his path has led over these years. But her reality today is nothing like peace. Deep in the shadowed forest, a disgusting presence has settled, a twisted, shapeless mass of flesh and limbs, a terrible sign that the Demon King is about to resurrect. It slips through the underbrush, carving an icy trail of fear around itself and devouring everything that crosses its path. The investigator slows her pace and crouches low. Her gaze tightens as soon as she confirms the terrible truth that rumors speak of. Corruption is spreading faster than anyone expected, and the stench of death is unmistakable. Her grim focus is broken by the appearance of scouts. They approach and address her with deep respect, for the legendary figure calls her like a hero. She stands motionless right in front of the soldiers, and her stern face calmly concentrates as she reads the report, confirming that the forces of the Demon King are indeed stirring and trying to gather and rebuild their ranks in the dark heart of the forest. The soldiers listen without the slightest hesitation, not losing heart. On their faces is a vivid mixture of reverence and fear from the very hero Lillian, who has become a beacon of hope for them. When the bald soldier suggests to call local travelers and make them clear out the beasts, she immediately cuts off the idea. He says, "These creatures may look like ordinary slizzy," but she interrupts, "In reality, they are much more dangerous. They have already devoured several victims. And sending ordinary warriors there means signing their death sentence, which will immediately feed the monster that continues to grow." With a heavy thought, she speaks aloud what hurts. Even her immense power cannot withstand such pressure. She can strike one or two monsters, but when they become numerous, the limit comes instantly. The warriors boil with the news and immediately see a dead end, and she, without uttering a word, only comes to the conclusion: stopping this approaching darkness is only within the power of one person. That. The one Ali Zai does not notice now is already sneaking closer than she suspected. At the very edge of the same forests, Alizai pulls the straps of his backpack and steps into the familiar darkness of the magical forest. Many years have passed since he was last here, but as soon as he glances at the city centers hidden behind the trees, he confidently puts everything together. His return must be the very push that will drive the world toward the storm that is already coming. He resolutely pushes through the dense underbrush of the magical forest, tightens the levered load with a strap, and throws it over his shoulder. Suddenly he stops. His gaze tightens because ahead, right on the road, a group of strange dark figures blocks his way. Casually but without any softness in his voice, he demands, "Who are they and what stands behind them?" He fixed his gaze on the shapeless, viscous drop spots before him, sighed heavily, and angrily ran his hand through his hair. Irritation clearly outweighed fear in him. A focused memory surfaced in his mind about how he left the village, and he honestly tells himself, he left not out of concern but to impress a dear student. But from this memory, a crushing urgency passes through his heart. He must reunite as soon as possible with the girls he considers his daughters, but these creatures block his way. They stubbornly do not move, and he reaches for the blade. Steel clinks as the sword just comes out of the sheath. A confident half-smile immediately appears on his lips as soon as he acknowledges their audacity for daring to stand in his way. The sword is drawn and ready like a stage act. He bluntly declares that if they continue to resist and cause him trouble, he will easily arrange some entertainment for them. All he has left, he walks along the forest path, when suddenly Russell pushes him out of the shadows of the underbrush to stand guard. Dark, bubbling masses begin to seep out, their viscous forms strikingly unlike the slimes he has already seen. And he swings the blade. The steel hisses sharply as it touches the creature, with acidic flesh that burns everything around. Having barely dodged the splashes of dissolving liquid, he immediately reads the verdict: one touch and it's over. He confirms this without hesitation by throwing a stone. It instantly disappears into the maw and dissolves as if it never existed. He steps back and frowns because the feeling of impending disaster finally reaches him. It weighs heavily in his palm, so he grips the sword even tighter. He can hardly believe it. This ridiculous death threat stands before him. In the gloomy silence, he fixes his gaze as the stone sinks without a trace into the very core of the slime and completely vanishes there, leaving neither crumb nor trace. These instant death creatures immediately close in on him, and his physical attacks instantly lose all effect. Suddenly he finds himself in a complete ring. Around him tightens a swarm of corrosive monsters that relentlessly grows. The state screams danger. He no longer hesitates, casting a shocked glance at the deadly odds that seem invincible, and sounds the alarm. Nearby, a small group of armored soldiers approaches the young elf named Lillian. They speak, asking if the man rumored about is truly the legendary Elias. Lillian calmly nods to confirm that it is him. Her eyes do not tremble as she says, "The mentor is already here." They again start spreading his name, gossiping about every detail. One soldier throws out a phrase that Alizai would have dealt with this threat in seconds. His words confuse them. Their faces fall into incomprehension. Because why would an artist of such caliber join the hero's party to strike the Demon King, and now wander these forests quietly accepting their praise without saying a word? They freeze in admiration and involuntarily conclude, if the rumors about his power are true, then Eli's strength is incomprehensible. They must also admit another thing: even his students show incredible skill, so in their eyes his image becomes even more formidable, even more legendary. Focused gazes fix on Lil Yun. She explains to the gathered man the true essence of Alizai. Her voice carries the assertion that he can find a way out of any trouble. She recalls how he once single-handedly pulled her out of a dungeon, covering 5 others. And for her, all this is just confirmation. He is that incredible guy who thrives under pressure. He is driven into a desperate dance of dodges. Every time the corrosive, slippery swarms rush to attack, he jumps out of their trajectory. The realization comes instantly how bad it is. His steel weapon will be eaten immediately, and no techniques or martial arts will break their liquid form. Only a hopeless dead end remains. Only when he looks around does understanding pierce him. He notices, despite the slime, the trees in this forest stand motionless, as if corrosion has not touched them. If his assumption is correct, the chance is already in his hands. He reaches forward and allows himself to absorb some power directly from the forest itself. He runs through in his head, if trees put down roots in soil thick with mana, then by nature they draw incredible resistance to magic. He picks up a crazy paceballs from a branch lying underfoot, an improvised weapon. The chase lasts only until the slugs approach. Their gelatinous bodies spread forward and the distance disappears again closer. As soon as the slippery body lunged to grab the prey, he managed to finish his work, and only then did he sharply dart forward. The wooden stake in his hand was held firmly, without the slightest play. A sharp jerk and the wooden pointed tip shoots straight into the creature's heart. The wood withstands the acid, and the slime shatters into pieces from the very impact the theory worked. For a moment he stops and gazes intently at the simple tool in his own hand, as if drawn back to the days when he crafted similar things. The irony is simple. This small skill really helps him because he clearly confirms magical resistance of wood neutralizes the corrosive properties of the slime, which means weapons carved from this forest can kill them. He presses on in the counteroffensive but still cannot stop the onslaught. Instant lithe vile remnants of creatures splash at him in waves, tearing his body apart. He has already realized their weak point. Just strike their cortex and the form immediately crumbles, the beasts die like any other slime. He gives himself a confident, self-satisfied smile and is already ready to rush forward, holding a viable solution for his plan in his hands. Clenching a magic-resistant wooden stake in his hands, the swordsman politely and modestly requests to clear the way so that he can move forward. Clinging to the nearest threat, he still keeps his course and makes his way through dense thickets until the crowns part and the sprawling urban environment emerges in the distance. Breaking out from beyond the forest boundaries, he takes a step forward and intently looks down at the giant stone walls of the fortress city. Arcana has finally reached the place he was heading for. The formidable fortress rises above the stone plateau and holds the main line of defense against the threats posed by the demonic forest nearby. Within these walls sprawls a noisy military megalopolis. It thrives on prosperity, skillfully nourished by a mighty mana flowing directly from the forest, which is its bastion. Approaching the giant main gates, he jerked sharply. It had been a full 10 years since the last time he set foot in a city of such scale. Despite the turmoil in his chest, he calmly and amicably waves to the armored guards watching his approach. Their faces show a mix of surprise and honed professional vigilance. He is immediately overwhelmed by a hostile mood. The guard raises his spears and points the tips directly at him, while voices simultaneously shatter the silence with alarm as the traveler from the forbidden forests appears at the threshold. The senior guard coldly lays out his ruthless protocol. The Night Order commands not to admit anyone coming from the demonic forest. The traveler, confused by such treatment, sharply demands an answer. Who exactly gave such a harsh directive? At the soldier's inquiry, he reveals cold reports. The forest is marked as a place from which no living person returns, a fact confirmed by the memories of those who have already buried their relatives in its depths. He continues to present a strange theory reached by the hero. Everything that comes out of the forest in human form is almost certainly a slug that has stolen a human likeness. The traveler exhausts himself struggling to prove his humanity and begs for a closer look, pressing in every word that he is not a monster. To finally dispel doubts, he reaches under his tunic and pulls out a shimmering traveler's card, showing it to the skeptical guard as irrefutable proof of who he is. The guard's eyes sharply widen as soon as he reads the inscription on the metal A rank. This designation belonged to a man named Elias. He whispered to others, but could not reconcile his unremarkable appearance with such a prestigious status. The swordsman stands motionless, the weight of his name hangs in the air like a dull burden, only when he is jerked by a spasm from unexpected words. A voice from the crowd addresses him with respect he did not expect. Despite the revelation already made, the perimeter still maintains pressure. Soldiers do not lower their weapons from their sights, even as the air near the city gates suddenly thickens and changes. When the guards rush forward, he is suddenly struck by fear. His chest tightens, his breathing falters. Their voices ring out with a thunderous command, keep him in sight and do not lose control. At that moment, a sharp blow knocks him off balance. He blinks frequently, confusedly trying to piece together what could have sparked such rage. The traveler is bound with tight, thick ropes. He freezes in place while the kidnappers maliciously boast, claiming they caught an imposter exactly like him. They dismiss any threats, delighting in their certainty. Even a slug disguised as a human is defenseless. Once captured, the most he can do is look around, and his gaze, full of distrust, relentlessly turns into growing rage. He sits silently as their mocking laughter rises thunderously above him. They ridicule the idea that their captive could be an A-rank adventurer. His stone face cracks with fury. Their arrogance irritates him because he fully understands he simply allowed this attention to continue so as not to bring unnecessary trouble upon them. The thudding of his footsteps echoed across the square, but his gaze suddenly caught on a gigantic stone monument which strangely resembled himself. Beyond that, the place seemed to tangle the thread. Why exactly does a statue of his likeness tower here, and what is hidden behind this whole story with the imposter? Suddenly his focus sharpens. His eyes narrow, and the gleam from the movement flickering at the edge of his vision irresistibly draws his gaze. The spearhead gleams a bloody echo of how death already stands nearby, and he instantly realizes. Time no longer belongs to him, it is a luxury he has lost. If his instincts do not deceive him this time either, the true nature of the threat does not allow him to remain captive even for a moment. The soldier's eyes sharply widen with anxiety as soon as he realizes. The shackles no longer hold. Panic breaks through his voice, and he warns others that the prisoner was breaking free. A forceful explosion tears the ropes with a sharp strike, The exhausted ends still twitch and whistle in the air until he snatches freedom for himself. The guards flinched from the blow from shock. Their spears droop because the man they decided to break has risen again and towers before them. He throws the severed ropes back directly into the guard's hands, incessantly apologizing and promising to return, and later to accept the sentence. The soldiers froze in place and silently fixed their gazes on what was happening until their prisoner suddenly began dictating the terms of his own escape. He flies through narrow streets, ignoring the frantic shouts of the guards behind who have already declared him a fugitive. In his mind, there is only one desperate thought: to reach the destination before it is too late. These quiet roofs look comfy, give no hint of the chaos boiling beneath them, hiding everything like the movements of those who lurked in the shadows. In a secluded corner, a young girl curls up on the cold stone floor, her eyes wide open from sheer terror, while two men loom over her. The man with a sharp, elongated nose sneers cruelly and delights in her condition, mocking, "She will become a very valuable trophy for the slave market." In silence and detachment, they remained confident. The men exchanged satisfied phrases, then noted they were not drawn to pursuit as promised. The two-faced leader saluted his comrades for the clean job and immediately considered what to do next in the next illegal deal. The girl sharply catches her breath as the leader twists the story. The enterprise collapsed because of one man who was there 15 years ago, and they themselves were driven underground. A cold, cruel gleam flashes in his pupil, and he solemnly utters a phrase about the revival of their cause. His hand is already reaching forward to immediately seize the first victim. Her desperate pleas for help are shattered only by the cynical laughter of a stranger's man who mocks her helplessness. While the leader is already frozen in the act, a shadow falls from the sky, silently hinting, retribution is near. From the laughter that tears the air with the rumble of thunder and fury, the swordsman bursts into the frame. His fists fly into the face of the slave trader, the blow shatters bones. He bears his anger and demands to be told what the hell they think they are doing, why the hell they even showed up at all. In a second, his appearance flips the roles. Predators swap places with prey. He held his position exactly. His mere stance seemed to lock the room with a key, and the slave traders stuck together in a convulsive stupor, glued in shock. One of them, clutching his face where the blow landed, whimpered, demanding to know who stood before them, and even in an old man's guise. The swordsman, irritated by the label, muttered that lately this old man seemed to have driven everyone crazy, and immediately decisively corrected their words. His name is Alize. Nearby, Lulian froze in silence, fixated on him. Her wide-open, tearful eyes dispelled fear, and it melted away, giving way to deep relief. A young girl sat on the cold ground, trembling. Her eyes widened to the limit, and in one glance mixed shock and first hope as a man approached her. He extended his hand, firmly and evenly grasped her, quietly assured her that the danger had passed, and carefully asked if she was okay. She did not have long to rejoice. The kidnappers were already preparing and wrapped her up, treacherously aiming to strike. But as soon as they could comprehend his movement, he had already slipped out of their line of sight and suddenly appeared behind them with such speed that an ordinary adventurer could not even process it. He did not allow them to regroup. With a sharp whirlwind, he swung his leg and one of the men spun in the air. His voice tore with outrage as he branded them cowards for praying to children. He did not give himself a second to face how the rest of his anger would pour out. In blind panic, he dashed back. Those who had stood confidently just a moment ago suddenly became frightened runners and tried at full speed to break the distance between themselves and the swordsman. The swordsman froze in place and, glancing gloomily downward, fixed his gaze on the last frightened men, as if judging them worthless. He put everything on the line. There was no more patience left for those who direct their strength to such vile deeds, and no excuses would change that. He fixed his gaze on how the rest of the criminals fled, and their screams of horror rolled through the alley until they realized they were facing a legend. In the next moment, he felt a warm weight on his waist. The rescued girl tightly embraced him with her arms. Her voice broke with tears as she whispered thanks to the great hero for the rescue. He cast a heavy look at her from head to toe, and for a moment, understanding flashed across his face. She sees in him the hero from the story. Not to break her childlike faith, he took on that role. Since he had stepped into her rescue, let him become exactly the hero she was waiting for. A man with wildly widened eyes and disheveled hair suddenly burst into the clearing like a whirlwind. His voice broke hoarsely as he, exhaling with relief, called out the name Anna in despair. He sharply lunged forward and pressed his daughter to his chest, squeezing her in strong arms so that the tightly wound knot of his anxiety finally loosened. Anna screamed sharply, her tears, which a moment ago were from fear, changed to relieved sobs. And Alize kept his distance and stood aside, silently watching this emotional reunion unfold. He fixed his gaze on the interlocutors and touched his lips to a quiet, understanding smile. Deep compassion lived in his eyes. He whispered softly, as if he knew the man perfectly, and his thoughts returned again to the time when his daughters were the same. Aliza abruptly breaks her own dreams with a sharp start, and at that moment the father lunges forward and grabs the traveler by the tunich's fiery protective gaze holds firmly, does not let go. The man demands an answer whether this stranger is the one who kidnapped his child, and Aliza, tensing up, raises her hands in a peaceful gesture and tries to explain. This is a misunderstanding. The tension of the clash cuts through the silence of the village street. A loud, irritated scream rising from inside the small hut tears the pause like a blade. Inside, the air seems to shift. On the wooden table, a generous spread of food is laid out. In the center lies a large, freshly baked round loaf of bread. Around it are bowls of hot, thick, and hearty stew. When the confusion was finally cleared up, the father bowed his head in deep apology and regretted how he had once been hostile to the man who rescued his daughter. Alizai, still a bit stunned by such a reception, aloud wondered whether such a lavish banquet could be justified for a simple act of rescue. He is greeted with a radiant smile as she arranges everything on the shelves and explains why this day was endured exactly as she demanded. She cuts in. It is a sin to silently bypass the proper gratitude to the hero. Alizai, leaning forward, folds his palms and utters a sincere prayer of thanks just before sitting down and starting to eat. He just insists on food, but the father briefly looks away from the plate to pour fresh beer into the mug, then leans forward, his gaze clearly showing genuine interest. The man asks if the name Alizai is really his. The daughter is sure he is a legend, but he himself has never heard of such a famous figure. He talks about the legend of the great hero Alizai, ancestor of 5 heroes who once defeated the Demon King. Holding a postcard, the man declares, the current heroes are searching for that legendary figure, and then adds that his daughter enjoys such tales the most. Alizai studies the illustration and mentally notes, in the image he does not look like a man at all. Comprehension seizes a new strategy from the traveler. He stops to think and sorts out the strange coincidence, bearing the same name as the legendary one. He cannot grasp why the characters of his era so relentlessly and futilely chase after his namesake. Whatever the reason, the conclusion is already ripening. This identity is a tool, and he decides to use it. He expresses gratitude and thanks the older man for the valuable advice. In his mind forms the thought, if he adopts this legendary image, he might manage to find the girls he is looking for and, ultimately, even get in touch with the heroes themselves. While he is about to leave, his father stops him with a question. Where is he going? The boy replies that he must fulfill a vital promise, and the information he received finally gave him the crucial lead he had been desperately searching for. Without warning, the old man falls to the floor in a desperate, solemn bow and suddenly confuses the traveler so much that he loses his footing. He will persuade the young man to stay in their house forever and immediately confess. He does this only for the happiness of his daughter. Then he will reveal the reason. Nearby, in the forest, danger is relentlessly growing. Strange slugs have multiplied, and the travelers who once kept them under control have disappeared. Since then, the village has lost its protection, and this almost cost Anna her life. The father snaps at the desperate pleas again and again, insisting that the mere appearance of Alizai and the spoken name will put Anna out of danger, even as he himself admits that his request sounds selfish. Looking at this devotion, the traveler clenches his fist. He feels the weight of a father's despair grasping the child for rescue fall onto his palm and then quietly, carefully asks him. He falls silent, his gaze fixed ahead, and in his mind an assessment ripens how oppressive the situation has become and what choice lies ahead. He silently accepts the words while the man lowers his head in deep, oppressive, apologetic submission. The father speaks simply. He also has a daughter not by blood, but the one he cares for above all, and he cannot come to terms with the thought of leaving her unprotected. The word daughter strikes him like a blow, and in his chest a dull, deep echo immediately responds. For a moment his stony impassiveness cracks. Only one thought flashes in his mind. His child lives, grows, ages every day, and is still waiting for a meeting. He feels that he must still achieve thesis soon as he finishes his current obligations. Swept away by a wave of emotions, the father stands with open tears and his voice breaks through the trembling. He stubbornly insists that he must go to her, because in these dark times he is overwhelmed by a desperate need to guarantee her safety at all costs. Catching the man's mood, he stands up and utters a calming word, openly admitting. Now he truly understands how serious everything is. After that, he asks a short and precise question. If the mucus threat is destroyed, will the other travelers finally return to their affairs in the village? Anxiety tears his gaze away. His father's eyes widen sharply. He impatiently breaks the silence and immediately warns. This is suicide, and many seasonal warriors have already disappeared without a trace in the forest. However, he does not back down and Inchanli firmly assures that everything will be fine. His composure sharply contrasts with the panic that just flared in his eyes. When the golden glow of sunset covers the village, he calmly and confidently leaves the house, and it turns out that on the way here he has already laid dozens of creatures. The path leads straight without any deviations to the local adventurers guild, so the stunned father and young Anna remain behind. In the hall, he approaches the counter where a young receptionist is laying out the rules. The forest of magic is not for commoners, and only those with rank B or higher can destroy slimes. He does not utter a single word, simply extends his ID, and suddenly a suffocating silence falls in the room. The receptionist instantly realizes that before her is an elite unit with an E-ranked rank. He pauses and lays out before the wide-eyed audience a troubling system of ranks. Almost everyone barely reaches the middle, while the A-ranker is a rare defender who can withstand true evil both for ordinary peasants and for the guild staff. And then he suddenly changes his image. From a traveler, he transforms into a figure from legend superhuman. The young Anna is praised, and she literally bursts with delight, telling her father that their guest is a legendary hero whose honorary rank cannot even compare. The father listens, holding a warm, smiling gaze on him, and in that gaze it is clear. He immediately senses the power behind the reputation of this young man. Having quickly gathered his gear, he prepares to levianly briefly stating his intention to go out. Anna and her father stop on the village path and wave their hands. The man shouts a sincere wish for a safe return, and the swordsman sets off on his way. At the very edge of the forest border, the local guards crowd along the path and, trembling, whisper so abruptly and quickly that they almost bump shoulders. Forbidden Woods, and that man who just entered. They cannot believe their own eyes. What they entrusted to the slimes turned out to be not something trivial, but a legendary knight from rumors who supposedly single-handedly crushed a demon army. A level like the great hero Lillian. Turning back to the village, Anna catches her father drawing his gaze to the distant line of the forest and carefully watching what is happening. He notes that the observation of the slime has already declined. In his thoughts, he paints this journey as something quiet and anticipates a quick return home, although he still does not understand what the task really entails. In the depths of the forest, silence covers him thick, unfriendly, sending chills down his skin. The slimes he was sent to exterminate are nowhere to be found there at all. His nerves tighten more and more as he runs through in his mind what could have wiped everything out so suddenly, especially since that place was always full of slimy creatures. The air around him swells and darkens with soot. Evil clings like sticky poison, settling on the skin, and the forest itself groans as if an invisible weight hangs over it. With grim certainty he assembles the puzzle. A headlurk not only slimes, the danger is much harsher. Although reluctantly he relies on the power he tries to hide in the shadows, he must still admit, in what awaits him in the trashy spaces, he may have no other way out. His determination is stretched by anxiety. In an instant he casts a glance straight into the very heart of the forest and rushes forward to where it is unknown. With each step he pressed deeper into the thicket, and in the darkness of the hidden cave Lillian stirred quietly, her wrists tightly bound above her head as if by a spell. She broke into a moan. The cold stone beneath her body sharply emphasized the throbbing pain in her arms and legs that would not let go. It hurt her to gather her memories together. How she was snooping in the forest of magic, noticed the strange absence of slimes, and how at that very moment an uncontrollable force suddenly overwhelmed her from behind. The last thing her memory recorded was the feeling that someone was watching her closely just before the surrounding world darkened. Clenching her teeth, she jerked repeatedly, reaching forward against the thick vines that bound her wrists, while her whole body was drained by a wave of lethargy as if cold water had struck her from head to toe. Her strength melted before her eyes and dissolved right into these plants that held her captive, so her muscles weakened and no longer obeyed. A deafening thud rolled through the room and forced her eyes to involuntarily slide to the shadow looming over her. A voice soaked with rage sharply confirmed that she had come toned from this. Recognition and fear surged through her as soon as she realized. She was no longer alone. Before her stood Jedjidas, the knight of the Demon King's army, third in rank. His muscular figure and curved horns stretched into the darkness, and he burst out laughing at her bewildered state, savoring the fact that he had returned from the very brink of death. Meanwhile, the humans still looked the same, predictably weak, easy to capture. He stepped even closer and, disdainfully cutting off her futile stubbornness, explained. The vines were grown precisely to suck out her mana. She showered him with curses and spits, but he did not stop. Only smiled, saying that her slow, painful end was taking its first step while her power continued to flow away. Suddenly the ground trembled and a dark, thick mass rumbled from beneath the earth. A swarm of viscous slimes crawled out of the darkness, encircling her from all sides. Her eyes widened, flashing with panic and horror as she realized. Traptigatas had already revealed his true nature, raising and using the very creatures she had sought to confidently bring about her demise. As soon as the first slime sluggishly crawled toward her, a familiar figure in a steel helmet cut through the darkness. Sudden intervention threw the demon off balance. He gave the order, "Do not panic. Ignore Gagatina's mocking chatter about the slime that continued to devour her body and magic slowly until the clash ended." He always stayed close as her support even when she herself fell into self-pity over what she imagined was her own weakness. Lillian, bound and blind, replays memories. Among girls her equals, she developed the slowest, and her spirit almost constantly hung on a thin edge of breaking. In those dark moments her thoughts clung only to him. She wanted him to search for her, stubbornly believing he would always arrive in time to save her as soon as she found herself in trouble again. She still feels him nearby, the unchanging rear that supported her throughout all the training days. What is happening to her is even harsher than the truth. Right above her looms the demon knight Gagatha. His phantoms tear through the air and twitch as if mocking her defenselessness. He demands an apology and her consent to his favor. He promises to stop the torture if she becomes part of the demonic race. But she can do nothing except silent crying and only quietly whispers about her savior. Suddenly, a demonic predatory trick cuts through the trajectory of a massive pressure surge racing at a mad speed. Gagatha's break in an instinctive turnthy sense, the presence of a stranger, and he bursts into amazement. How can some miserable human be the bearer of such colossal power? Confidently bearing his own defenses, he defiantly spits and declares that no enemy will be able to reach him through the barriers. He stands arrogantly, completely unaware that the force is already very close and about to strike him. A deafening, piercing roar shatters the silence. The barrier flies apart, the wall cracks and crumbles, and some figure bursts through the breach. The stranger rushes at such speed that demonic tears scatter to the sides and don't even have time to recover after this instant appearance. The swordsman, with one sweeping, incredibly strong strike, cuts through the viscous tears, and the blade leaves behind a trembling, blurred reflection of steel. Hagata's completely loses vigilance. The furious speed of the attack knocks him off his feet. Caught exactly in the middle of the debris and demanding an answer as to whether it is the demon causing destruction in the forest. Lillian, hearing the familiar voice, barely manages to gather trust. Her prayers have finally been heard. The demon knight froze as if pressed to the ground. His eyes widened sharply when he saw a man crouching sneak up right to him. He couldn't process it, though a mortal had just sliced through the slime protective wall as if it were natural, though such a thing should be unthinkable for any ordinary person. Seizing the moment when the opponent froze, he lunged forward with a piercing, desperate scream, but the swordsman moved with such speed that common sense could not keep up. The demon's hateful attack struck only emptiness, blow missed, and he, shouting through rage, barely managed to realize that the distance between them vanished in an instant. Human, terrible reflexes kicked in. He did not want to admit defeat even for a step. A dark, acrid stream of slime burst from his palms, and he shouted frantically for that alien to dissolve into oblivion. He stubbornly told himself, no person could withstand such a direct magical blow, but his confidence quickly crumbled as soon as he drank in the warrior's reaction. Soon the threat caught up, so the warrior dashed forward and upward, barely managing to dodge the poisonous wave that tore the ground behind him with a roar. As soon as he landed, he fixed his gaze on the opponent and finally recognized the demon, the master who controls the slime horde. He remained composed. A simple wooden blade was already at the ready, and the demon knight sank deeper into mental madness, which twisted him into a black vortex. The monster could not bear the thought that his perfect creations were being dismantled so easily, and incessantly questioned how such a person could even exist in this world. Cutting through the oppressive silence, the demon demanded an answer, whether this man was a descendant of the legendary hero. In response, he fixed his gaze on the stranger and encountered only pure, sincere incomprehension. The knight was even more amazed. The stranger seemed to have no idea either what he possessed or how deadly the forest inhabitants were. He again and again revolved around the impossibility of what was happening, and the fact surfaced in his mind. The hero's lineage was doomed to extinction. His gaze fixed on the human weapon, that sword, and he tried to understand whether it was made from the rare wood of the demon forest, but even that did not solve the main question. Where does such incredible power come from if it is right before his eyes, in plain sight? Finally, a terrifying thought overwhelmed him. He stood too close and drank in the core of his last slime. These creatures did not exist for death, they stubbornly regenerated until their heart was broken by one single, flawless strike. And this was not an ordinary fight. The man destroyed each slime with one single lonely push, precise and perfect. He froze in shocked stupor and could not comprehend how in one moment each of his slimes could be destroyed. The demon's calm was shattered by tension, and he ordered to reveal the true identity of the man standing opposite, whose skill defied all logic. Just as he managed to realize the threat was real, the young man closed the distance and disappeared, then reappeared with blinding speed to cover with a series of sharp strikes. The demon barely adjusted his defense to the furious onslaught. His eyes widened as the wooden blade whistled through the air. The captive feels strength flowing through her body again. The sticky slime that caught and bound her softens and recedes. The masters no longer hold their gaze on her, all their attention is torn by the battle. Amid the clamor of metal, she catches a familiar voice, and at that moment it dawns on her. Her rescuer has indeed reached the place. She twitches, trying to break free from the taut ropes, while meanwhile they fasten her to a mighty root. Flashes of memories flicker in her mind, the lesson that was burned into her brain. She firmly understands, salvation will not come from nowhere. She must act and find a way to help herself even in this harsh situation. A barely noticeable memory of that quiet moment flashes in her head, and she suddenly realizes, even the strongest opponent has a weak spot if you look closely enough. Gritting her teeth, she forces herself to pull together and chooses to carve a path for her ally, although the enemy crushes with force and holds a devastating advantage. Gathering all her strength into a fist, she begged for rescue. Her voice tore through the roar of battle. The fencer sharply turned his head toward her, and recognition flashed in his eyes. He immediately understood that this was Liao Yun, the very one held captive. The demon breaks out a wicked, tearing laughter, and seizing the moment to strike, takes advantage of the warrior being distracted by the girl's presence. Then he rushes forward with renewed fury, while the young man, in a frantic scream, begs her to run. He mocks their touching attachment and cuts ahead. The desire to hold onto each other will lead to death. Clutching a black ball of dark energy between his palms, he draws cruel mockery from their weakness and prepares to end their lives once and for all. He looms over the captive girl and cuts in. Negotiations are over. He sneers mockingly and, addressing Alize, hisses a threat. Any resistance and Lillian will die instantly. He orders the warrior to lower his sword, and Alize freezes in place, petrified, not taking his eyes off the blade he holds in his hand. Laughter rings in waves, brazen, mocking, as if ridiculing how the warrior desperately tries to cover his comrade. Unconcealed, it throws words, "Let Alize just disappear and slime will devour him." Alize grits his teeth in anger, feeling fear rise along his spine. The end is very near. Meanwhile, Lillian watches closely, her head spinning with the realization her kidnappers will again and again resort to such vile tricks. Chained and subdued, she still does not look away. He holds power in his hands and bets on his lianas. She notices that a hidden flaw lies in his might and takes it for use. If she manages to snatch magic from him even for a moment, Ali Zayn will have a chance. Suddenly she lets out a muffled scream and with a single nod gives the signalto strike. At that very second the demon bursts into wild laughter, but the laughter immediately turns into pain. His body convulses as if being torn apart from within. Alizai freezes, stunned, unable to comprehend what exactly has flipped until it dawns on him. Lil Yun somehow seized the chance he had been waiting for. He did not hesitate, lunged forward with a sharp jerk, and the blow pierced through the opponent. But to his shock, the creature does not shed a drop of blood. Instead, it begins to blur and scatter into separate features. The warrior cannot believe what he sees when he realized the formidable enemy turned out to be just a massive slime. And just like him, his comrade freezes in silent amazement. What once was a nightmare in the form of a dark mass breaks into pieces and collapses onto the stone floor as a hot, steaming puddle. A moment later, everything freezes, and she stares in shock at what remains, unable to believe it. Her voice falters, but she persistently repeats, "The demon she once met and defeated was definitely not slime." The warrior stands over the dark baptismal font. The sword is still in his hand, stretched forward, and he himself is trying to gather his thoughts after that sudden victory. A heavy silence falls in the hall, and doubt does not leave him. Has the threat really been destroyed, or is this just another level of cunning deception? The remnants of the creature continue to lose life. They resemble living flesh less and less and increasingly turn into discarded, rotten meat. The dark entity suddenly contracts and disappears from sight, leaving behind only a grim testimony of the strange, unnatural power they have just felt. He froze among the ruins and fixed his gaze on the spot where the demon had fallen. The weight of realization pressed on his shoulders. If he had been left alone, the beast would have fled without hesitation. All this victory flashed silently through his thoughts, built by the girl who risked everything to pull him out of trouble. He turned away from the fight and dropped to his knees right in front of her as she shakily pressed against the massive roots of the ancient tree. His name slipped from his lips in a barely audible, warm breath was drinking in her eyes, trying to read even the slightest hint of endurance. Her face turned pale and seemed frozen. She was still holding onto the long trail of magical residue, and Hupe Close was hit by it with pure horror. He couldn't gather his thoughts because he understood how merciless the harsh test she had endured was. As he stared at the mutilated markers, waves of thoughts overwhelmed him. The traces stretched, overgrown with parasitic vines that had almost drained her life. Her sharp, desperate scream instantly shattered the moment of his Anissa loud warning to flee immediately, and that sound, like a blade, sliced through the air. He had not yet recovered when a whole geyser of dark, acrid slime burst from the ground behind him, its shadow spread wide and loomed threateningly. A viscous mass slapped with a crash and hit him directly with a disgusting splash, suddenly tearing from his hands the attempt to cover himself. For a moment, as if painted with shock, his face froze in pure astonishment. But as soon as he realized that their enemy had survived a blow that should have caused death, his mind was pierced by icy, sharp torment. From the crimson puddle teeming with living essence, a smaller and denser figure of a demon crawled out. As soon as the mass took shape, its visibility came alive, the same focused mind shot at it with malicious intellect. The demon hissed, boasting about his amazing luck and mocking the fact that now he recognized his name, while he himself clenched his teeth from the burning pain where the slime had burned through his flesh. The creature declared him a real threat to the future return of the demon king, a pesky figure that must be driven out of reality. With one last contemptuous, mocking spite, enjoy your short remnants of life, it soared into the air and vanished into the darkness of the forest. He rushed after it, but as soon as he took a step, a sharp cry of pain broke out. His leg buckled and the corrosive residue burned his skin. As soon as the immediate threat receded, she called out to him. Her voice trembled because anxiety for his condition would not let go. He forced himself to nod as if everything was really fine, but his heart still clenched convulsively. The demon had escaped from their hands, and her gaze immediately fixed again on the urgent task to bandage her wounds. He reaches out his hand, and a pure anxiety is frozen on his face. In a tone full of reproach, he demands explanations for why she behaves that way and calls what is happening pathetic. She sits motionless, a heavy bandage covers her eyes, and she implores him to stop, unable to bear his gaze. He kneels right beside her. He gazes at her tearset, how she sobs after their meeting, and through a shift of shame admits she was exposed and in such a pitiful state after so many years. Her voice tears from helpless despair, and she again and again repeats the same. He promised her power, but it turned out she herself dragged herself into this miserable trouble. Wiping away tears, she persuades him how she can manage to lift her gaze again and meet his eyes. She asks to be left alone, insists that she is still the same weak as she always was. But he responds only with a quiet, all-too-knowing smile, cold toward her and without a trace of concern. He reaches his hand forward, carefully pulls the bandage from his eyes and throws it away as if it really were worthless. Unwaveringly, firmly, he says, she was never weak, neither then nor now, and adds that it was she who just saved his life. When the bandage comes off, her tear-filled eyes open without delay. He barely whispers her name, and his hand gently rests on her face until finally the weight of the long-awaited meeting lifts, leaving them in silence. She is overwhelmed with feelings and falls into his arms, finally admitting how long silence had separated them. Through tears, barely audible, she whispers his name. A moment and her figure already looks steady, and she herself is wrapped in a cloak of leaves and feathers. She whispers an apology for her unattractive appearance, immediately assuring that everything is fine. He responds with a proud, barely amused smile and throws out that she has grown so much from these words. She sharply shifts her gaze to him, cutting the air with irritation. She presses her full weight against him. His strength is already at zero. He catches sight of the blood appearing on her leg, but she sharply dismisses his concern, denying that her own pain is anything more than a trifle as long as he remains safe. Realizing that the forest still holds them, he raises his voice and calls for rescue. Through the dense thickets, he tears the silence with a scream, searching for a familiar presence. Camia. From the darkness bursts a huge gray wolf with white fur. He lowers his head and speaks to the young man as if addressing his master. From what she sees, the young elf girl loses her balance and freezes her gaze, recognizes the legendary ancient wolf, the sacred guardian of the forest. He pulls forward a small pouch of coins, offering it as payment for the path ahead. The great beast snatches the tribute and growls low, satisfied, then nods to take them back to the safety of the city. As soon as they settled on the broad back of the wolf, she quietly confesses. She wants again, just a little, to feel like a child, and the warm sensation of the ride covers her without any doubt. She is drawn to find out what happened between them all these years, so she asks where he had been all that time. He reels through his memory his 10-year solitary escape in a remote village inside the Forest of Magic, and explains how Akin and Nina, his companions, had been eagerly awaiting this day. When he catches that her old friends have finally moved upward, a genuine smile lights up her face. Even in this quiet moment, he cannot shake off the chains of memory, the demon he himself released. He is held by a stubborn feeling that the creature's escape is only a link in a broader, even more insidious conspiracy unfolding deep within the forest. Catching his anxiety, she meets his gaze, soft, warm, and attentive. She says, her dream is not just to roll back time, but to build another future and create new memories alongside him. She, together with her companion, moved on, not even suspecting that a gloomy prophecy already hung over their path. Betrayal was approaching, one that would strike the most terrible blow. While forest darkness stood around, a small dark creature with sharp horns and one piercing eye emerged from the shadow. It crawled forward as if at dawn. Ancient, deep-rooted hatred roared in its body. The beast hissed a poisonous vow into the silence. And holding absolute confidence in every word it declared, Elize will not slip from her control, and she herself will deliver the deadly blow. The huge arched corridors of the Master's mansion in Arcana City sink into silence. and a muffled scream of agony rolls from behind the heavy wooden doors of the private room. Inside, she suddenly collapses to the floor. Her body convulses, shivers run in waves, and she begins to beg to be torn from her torment. Her right hand is no longer flesh, from the wrist crawls a twisted, bark-like dark texture. It cracks, shifts, and emits a disgusting crunch. Swallowing tears, she raises her gaze and catches a small horned creature sitting on the very top of some piece of furniture. Unable to bear the despair, she gasps for air and shouts the name of the one she blames. Gagades. The animal drags a creepy familiarity, as if it still holds their last meeting in memory and understands how long ago it was. Mockingly, it starts a conversation. What has become of her now, and is it true that she is already the lord of this city? She cannot immediately believe it and only clings with her gaze to the very essence. Her breath falters as soon as she utters it, frontier count. And moment by moment, the weight of what happened presses down so much that she has to hold on with all her strength to the cold floor to avoid collapsing and falling. A sharp attack of pain makes her twitch. She involuntarily raises her face and her eyes close just as sharply. And the creature does not miss the moment. It mocks again, pushing with a question whether she has felt how the Vergerib curse, which was placed on her 2 years ago, works, the same one that continues to mercilessly devour her limbs. Despair colors her voice as she sharply demands, "Well, tell me, what can this creature even want from her now?" She presses with a new question. What else is it going to take from her? The creature pretends to be offended, as if her words are too harsh for an old acquaintance. Finally, she shows her intentions and issues an ultimatum, forcing cooperation. When the creature begins to speak, the growth from the tree on her hand pulses wildly, a new scream of pain tears from her lips. She convulsively clenches the limb, and at that moment she begins to transform. In the darkness, she drops to her knees in order, heavy and merciless, presses her to the ground like a stone. Above her, a creature looms from the haze. A voice sounds from the darkness, cold, rough, demanding a human sacrifice to make a lure. Feeling empty submission, she quietly utters consent. And the curse on her hand silently reminds her she is still in captivity. In a warm room bathed in sunlight, Ali Zai sits far from that dark chamber opposite his companion, and as soon as separation divided them, solemnly greets her. The man holds his gaze on her, but his thoughts already rush to Lulian, to how noticeably the girl has matured since their last conversation. He runs a memory through his mind. Once she was not the strongest child at all. She was drawn to the quiet company of ancient tomes and magical research, not to physical labor. And even now, when she draws so many glances in the city, he stops on one thought. Is that tall, majestic woman he sees really the same girl he once knew? While they are still talking, the elf with a barely noticeable smile throws a brief remark. The young woman has unexpectedly become the favorite of the local men. This news throws him off balance, and the companion silently runs through a thought in his mind. It turns out, this should have been voiced much earlier. The burden of this new information presses him into noticeable despair. He heavily rests his head on his hands. Under his breath, he quietly mutters, shifting the thought in his mind that the age has come when such romantic interests are quite natural. His composure shatters into pieces. He bursts into fierce, offended rage, shouting his disapproval, and cannot accept the idea that any man could approach her. Without letting the wave of agitation run wild, Alice skillfully steers the conversation in another direction, straight to the main point. The clash with the demon Gagadas in the forest thickets. He casts doubt on who this creature really is and recalls that strange slippery one they had to face, but she immediately cuts him off and sets everything straight. She says, Gagadas, whom she once knew, was a demon of flesh and blood. And when she finally convinces herself that it is indeed him before her, she personally deals with him as she did many years ago. She reveals a grim theory, and as soon as he hears about a possible resurrection, his anxiety tugs from within. She suggests, what met them in the forest is not a real demon, but a dormant seed or an egg, tracking the right moment to return the fallen creature to its full terrifying power. She repeats her version once more and declares, when her theory hits, then the egg is truly a terrible device crafted to devour life and mana. Her companion does not look away and catches every word. Only now do all the puzzle pieces click in his head, and he clearly understands how dangerous it all is. After these revelations, both clearly realize the danger is much more terrifying than a single demon. Right above them rises a real threat, the full-scale resurrection of the Demon King's army. The weight of this conclusion knocks the man off his feet. His brain wildly accelerates, racing thoughts forward and spinning out consequences for the entire world. Just for a moment, their gloomy conversation breaks off. The father jumps up, gasps for air, and uncertainly stumbles into the room. The older man immediately freezes, meeting his gaze in such a state, but he cannot handle any talk about demons. His eyes are wide open because his fear lies somewhere else entirely. The elder man rushes forward and seems to collapse into weakness as he reaches to grab his son by the shoulders. He pleads, His voice breaks, and he begs his son to persuade Lady Eliza to intervene. The words barely break through his despair. With complete despair, he falls down and collapses through his knees. His son grabs him by the support and forcefully pushes out the question, "What happened to Anna?" After that comes an oppressive silence. It weighs like a father's grief, which he never voices, but his posture reveals it. The man has already crossed the line. When the son is gasping from urgency itself, the father begs to immediately return him back to Anna. The young man sharply turns to the elf, respectfully says a few words to her, then goes to the father. Before leaving, he nods quick apologies to Lillian for the sudden departure and promises to explain everything later. As they approach the modest house in the village, the man is overwhelmed by growing horror. Just as he steps over the threshold, fear spirals fully. He freezes in shock, staring fixedly at the bed where a young girl lies, her body distorted by an unknown ailment so that he cannot piece together what exactly he is seeing. He, shivering, watches as Ali Zai slowly examines the girl and, recovering from her condition, calls it by the same curse, greening. The girl reveals the cause. It is a mysterious disease that roots the skin into the tree and pulls the victim deeper and deeper, step by step, until it completely consumes them. And in the last few years, it has appeared more and more often, and now his life literally hangs by a thread. She fixates her gaze firmly on the wronged girl, and a cold understanding grows in her mind. This curse spreads much faster than anything in the known records about grinification. Nearby, the girl's father snaps her attention back to reality. He presses with the force of questions, demanding answers, his voice hardening and ringing with suspicion and fear as he interrogates why they appeared here. Suddenly, the heavy door flies open with a deafening crash, and an armed squad bursts into the room. Their shocking arrival instantly throws everyone off balance. They rapidly close the ring around the group, precisely raising their spears to chest level with almost perfect aim. The father is the first to rush forward, panic breaking in his voice and screaming in terror, commands, "Name who these strangers are." When the tension rises, the rhythmic clicking of high heels spreads across the floorboards. The young man looks up and notices a figure approaching, and the voice calmly and unhurriedly announces, "Their arrival, Gagatas and Zakladav." Word for word, exactly as predicted. The stranger is a woman of incredible elegance. Long light brown hair falls on her shoulders, framing a face with cold, composed equanimity. She addresses the hero by name and introduces herself as a legendary figure honored in the Scythe, one who once defeated the forest slug, and the one who now holds responsibility for the condition of the demon knight Gagates. She glances sideways at her companion and, barely stretching her lips into a smile, states, "In person he looks much older than on the recruitment leaflets." His face flashes with indignant irritation and he orders her to stop this talk about the old man immediately. He squints, squeezes out a tense look and demands an answer. Who is this woman and why has she cornered them? The hero rises from his seat. As soon as she names herself Ria Arcana, Frontier Count, he responds with silence in a low tone. This young noblewoman is the very figure who reshaped the region and brought unprecedented profits to the city by launching rapid development in an amazingly short time. Though she is still young, she has already become a formidable ruler, and now her gaze is fixed firmly on the guests. She spoke calmly and composedly. Supposedly, her search lasted only by the order of Gagata himself, and meeting him was quite an honor. But as soon as these words left her lips, tones of distrust were immediately heard in them. The man opposite began demanding clarity, specifying what exactly she meant by calling herself a vassal of such a creature. To his sharp question, Eliza responded not with words but with doubt. It seemed inconceivable to her that anyone could voluntarily swear allegiance to a demonic lineage. The blonde did not flinch. Instead, she met his gaze calmly and firmly and confirmed that she truly was a servant of that person. Her tone and gaze looked absolutely truthful, but this only made him feel worse inside, because he patiently stayed in the shadows and watched her every move. The fact that the border count would overcome his pride and bow before the demonic knight shattered to dust everything he had managed to carry in his mind about the political situation and human pride. Then he caught something unusual beneath her elegant clothing, several distinct marks leading from her left shoulder to her neck and then stretching down her legs. He clearly counted at least 3 significant wounds, and one on her right arm looked the most severe. Unexpectedly for himself, this observation struck his mind with realization. A brief glance of gloomy insight appeared on his face. If intuition does not betray, somewhere behind her obedience hides a dark reason, and now he began to guess why Gagata still unquestionably obeys every whim of his, even despite his condition. He stopped near the elf Lillian and spoke in a whisper haltingly, as if the words were stuck in his throat. His gaze was fixed only on her, not on the Countess. The man asked if she heard something unnatural in the air around, a distinct, moist sound resembling the movement of water and something like slime shifting and sliding. She listened silently as he laid everything out more clearly. His suspicion grew. Gagatas was capable of using this very room to closely monitor their movements. By the walls lined with rows of spears and weapons, they felt the threat of surveillance tightening around their necks. Anadan, she was already focused. She activated her sharp elven senses to bring to light the truth about their situation. Her gaze hardened, her face became stern, plunged into the work, and was determined to find any hidden entities lurking in the shadows. She tenses, absorbing with elven senses. Her ears twitch and stretch every time she scans the space around for any sign of hidden slimes. Her companion keeps her in sight and does not look away. He is sure that it is enough to hint at surveillance somewhere for her extraordinarily sensitive hearing, honed since childhood, to catch it even before they take another step. She carefully examines the room, combing through every corner, and to confirm she tells the group, there are no slimes nearby. Her companion demands a final answer and she, decisively tilting her head, nods while standing over the bed where another girl rests peacefully. For a moment, relief washes over her. No one else is tracking them. When she retreats, he refocuses on the woman in the black dress, pressing with questions, demanding the truth, and leading her to the idea that she behaves this way only because of threats from Gagades. He urges her with words, stop lying, the falsehood is no longer needed since now everyone knows what is happening with her. He perceives strange distortions as if pain is oozing from them and sees how she endures it in her chest and joints, then immediately puts together the puzzle in his mind. It is an ancient curse. His final conclusion hits like a blow. The border countess is afflicted with the curse of corruption. This news stuns everyone in the room, especially Ali Zai and Lulan. They are struck by the severity of her condition, which can no longer be ignored. He barely caught the explanation when she jerked away sharply and instantly gave a sharp reply. Her gaze narrowed, defiance and pain intertwined in it. She asks what it changes despite the threats. The weight of her situation presses so hard that her voice breaks and trembles from suppressed feelings. Her patience finally snaps and breaks. She yells at them, pushing away their pitiful sympathy, and demands an answer. They forgive her only because she was threatened. Through salty tears, she confesses aloud. She has already taken many lives in this city, Evan, to the point that she herself offered these people as sacrifices to the demonic race. She collapses to the floor and curls into a helpless heap, surrendered only to despair. She acknowledges the full extent of her crimes and right now confirms Gigoitis has fallen into someone's hands again because of Haran today. She is overwhelmed by shame for her own cowardice, and one thought spins in her head. How can she even survive, stay alive, after what she has done, pathetically clinging to this life? With a sharp screech, she lifts her eyes from the ground, with a broken soul admits her own defeat and declares, from now on she is a vile servant of Demon's body and soul. Others can only silently watch as her confession weighs over them, settles inside, and reveals how deeply in darkness she lived. He sits down nearby and kneels, touching with words an almost warm but stubborn intonation as if emphasizing how many times she probably tried to defend the residents of the city. She looks away. Her answer trembles in a barely audible whisper as she denies, unable to allow herself any relationships where there is tenderness. Fixing his gaze on her, he casts a curse in word sand, sees it slowly devouring her body, exacting a heavy toll from her resistance. He only clarifies, how many times did she have the courage to stand against the Gagatas, knowing in advance how devastating this blow would be? In the semi-darkness of the room hangs silence, and in the air lingers its long, hidden struggle, but it remains powerless, lying on the floor. He makes a bold promise. He claims that only he can defeat the Gagatas and finally win her the freedom that was taken from her. She immediately rejects this idea, and when she says victory is impossible, her voice trembles with conviction. Tears are already gathering in her eyes as she asks, how could anyone even dare to offer her help after everything that happened? But he does not flinch or look away. His eyes remain steady, and within them holds a determination she has not felt for a very long time. He leans even closer, urging her to tear the truth from within and say where the real Ria Arcana is hidden. Calmly, without pressure, but firmly, he says, she is right before his eyes from now on. One cannot hide behind their own guilt. She hesitates, and her gaze involuntarily slides down, as a new wave of fear tightens her chest. In a low, wary tone, she asks if he is just another pawn sent by Gagatas to torment her even longer. Suddenly, she tears the silence with a desperate scream for rescue. Her chest bursts with sound, and her body begins to tremble convulsively. Inside her, the curse cannot withstand the wave of her despair. It disperses the fierce onslaught and goes out of control. He freezes in horror, his gaze darts around, and his eyes widen as the dark energy begins to thicken in dark strands right in the air, ready to swallow the little that remains of her spirit. When asked about her condition, Lil Yun barely utters a weak "I'm fine," but as soon as she speaks, the space around begins to crumble as if the room lost its support. Lil Yun shudders and lets out a frightened cry as a giant rhino-like limb breaks through the wall, revealing the fact, danger has just torn off its mask. The woman sighs with relief, and in a moment everything in her fades as the young hero draws his blade. Panic grows in her eyes as she realizes the source of destruction. Right before her is the very girl they were searching for, but no longer human. The right side of her body is devoured by a grotesque wooden growth, trembling and pulsing with dark energy. Lillian cannot come to terms with the appearance of the monster her consciousness rebels like a nightmare. She breaks the silence with a scream and insists that this creature cannot be Anna. Her father freezes beside her, paralyzed by horror while she is already turning into something else. But the creature only snorts disdainfully, emits a distorted wheeze instead of a voice, and declares, "There will be no forgiveness for anyone who betrays Gagatas." The creature does not stop and continues to horrify with its story. It claims to have absorbed a foreign heartbeat rhythm completely unlike that of ordinary ones while prowling in the darkness in search of them. Lillian interrupts the demand with a reply, pressing the words, "What kind of curse could have caused such a terrifying change?" Her voice breaks with trembling yet intertwines rage and despair, for she must unravel what lies behind the nature of her enemy. The young hero voices his demands and around him there is only deaf silence. The defiled girl lashes out with her gaze through the window, and her movements are too smooth and soft, as if at night she glides away, breaking free from this place. Lillian immediately rushes after her, but a male voice thunders an order. "Stay away and do not rush into where a deadly trap may lie in wait." The man's warning scream is too late. A giant predatory maw bursts from the ground, opening the path of death with jagged petals, and Lillian has to slam on the brakes, stopping abruptly. The beast sinks its gaze into her and gives a sadistic smile, then aloud reveals. She herself voluntarily gave herself as food to this botanical nightmare to advance her master's goals. The young man panics as he stares at the completion of the transformation. The girl hovers above the vines, and her body involuntarily twists into a shape she calls Labatoka's. She lifts her chin and solemnly declares that she is a demon born by the will of Gagatas. The man still hides in the shadows and silently watches, and at that moment his face hardens because he finally understands how great an evil they have already managed to unleash. The demon's speech shocks the young heroine. Her head spins, and her thoughts frantically replay the consequences of this new threat. If Gagatas can truly spawn demons beyond mere slimes, then both the blow to the village and the risk to the world are far greater than they had previously imagined. The man silently froze and stared at the twisted creature before him. On the face complete emptiness, not a hint, and the terrible transformation hangs in the air like the spectacle itself. She hangs upside down and a mocking smile stretches her lips. The demon asks, why does he no longer shudder and choke with rage if he surely recognizes the features of the girl she once was? He insists their true purpose must be revealed, and the demand sounds calm in an even voice, even despite the terrifying presence of the creature. She, on the other hand, snorts disgustedly. Her body creaks like old boards when she shifts her weight, and she steers the thought in the direction that their intent would be painfully obvious to someone like him. His fist clenches tightly near his thigh. The glove stretches over the knuckles, and he holds his anger inside as the fire of rage flares up. The demon moves closer and whispers that her mission is to destroy him, emphasizing firmly, everything that happened is his fault, for he dared to challenge Gagates. He demands to name the place where her master works, and despite her mockery, intends to get to the source of this corruption. She gives a grim, wide smile in response, her eyes fixed on him, predatory intent in action, as she is about to deliver her final message. He stands motionless next to Alize while the creature delivers a message from Gagates, very one they call Demetrator. The air fills with the tension of the upcoming clash, and the demon's words echo in the open space like a reverberation. He squints as soon as she raises her crooked finger and orders them to search for Lake Lamentation far in the frenzied forest to the east. At the very end, her last poisonous look. She swears that it will be Alize who dies as soon as they meet again. The man feels a sudden tremor in his body. His eyes widen as soon as the boards creak and start to slide beneath his feet. Behind his back, someone is still recovering from the previous shock, and his gaze is fixed on the ruined girl Labatoka's. She meets them with a cold, half-wind glance. In despair, he wheezes a warning to Rayon from below. Right off the floor, a huge wooden limb jumps out, crooked, heavy. Labatoka sneers mockingly. Her voice drips with venom as she declares that the traitors will be sacrificed to Gagates. Not a second to pause. He lunged forward and snatched Alize from the very zone of danger, and at that very moment the wooden spike cracked and crumbled where she had just stood. She gasps for air, shouting his name in panic, and from the force of the blow splinters fly off in all directions, scattering in the air. He drinks in the sight of the monster and immediately realizes she was hiding her right hand to strike from below, from between the boards, right from under the floor. Labatoka for him is just form and outlines. Her face with Makari breaks down into cold, severed indifference as soon as she decides, enough of the strike. Under the weight, the whole structure creaks and groans. Giant roots break through the walls and threaten to collapse the room, cracking beneath them. He growls orders to the soldiers to take Rhea and the old man and get out of here before the forest, which is already approaching, completely destroys the building. When the ceiling collapses inward with a roar into a cloud of dust and debris, Labatoka throws the old man a daring farewell and does not lose sight of her. With sword at the ready, he cuts through the falling ruins, determined to stop this threat once and for all. She freezes her movement for a moment, and in her one human eye flashes a sharp, eerie clarity as she looks back at the chaos she has just unleashed. In her gaze pain and tears, she barely whispers to Ali Zai that she can no longer bear this pain. Below, the man is already tensing his arm for a strike, but stumbles for a moment as he notices the twisted, demonic smile still flickering on the distorted side of her face. He barely manages to jump back as a huge, twisted wooden claw with claws crashes into the ground right where he stood a moment ago. The beast mocks his unsolidness, as it seems to him. His voice is a ragged mix of childish pleas and demonic predatory growls. After a landing that looks effortless, he freezes and watches as she continues to press him psychologically, boasting as if her current appearance makes her invulnerable to blows. She is convinced his hesitation is born of nothing else but the fact that he still has attachment to the girl she so resembles. He does not change his facial expression and briefly notes, she has already twice emphasized how significant her physical form looks, so now he examines everything sharply like an analyst. He clarifies whether she is just a parasite attached to the child or a demon flawlessly impersonating her likeness. He adds, this is already the second time and this time she was wrong. This reference strikes a noticeable chord and his face contorts. Shock mixes with increasingly fierce anger in his gaze. He gives her no respite, pressing with a demand to name the place where the real Anna is. And she shudders as the realization dawns. Her face was shattered so easily over a trifle. She freezes in shock and is unable to move. Her complete silence only fuels his suspicions. Aloud evenly, almost indifferently, he voices the conclusion. By her own words and reactions, he has already read everything needed to expose this lie. He continues to harass, pressing his gaze on how her panic is unmistakably read on her face. As soon as he realizes she has been outwitted, the demon flares with a furious jerk. Rage boils, and he is already on the verge of action, drawing small nate daggers and preparing to end this spectacle with one strike once and for all. Suddenly, a whirlwind of air covers the creature from all sides, and in the next moment, her hands and feet are clenched in ethereal shackles. Lulun is nearby. Her magic flares with a restraining force, instantly locking the demon and completely cutting off its movements, causing the monster to convulsively freeze from the blow. He immediately perceives the striking skill and unmistakably recognizes the cunning combination of fencing and sorcery that Lillian wields. The enraged devil roars through his teeth in powerless fury, but Elise is already moving forward, the blade ready to strike. Her cold gaze does not waver, and she declares that she will not allow her companion to be humiliated, then focuses to execute this creature. He stares intently as the companion raises the blade to the creature's very throat and commands it to reveal where to find the real Anna. The mimic twitches, trembles, cornered, but gives neither consent nor answer. When the pause drags on, he sharply intervenes and explains. Silence is proof that she understands exactly where the girl is now. He steps closer, keeping his voice even but firm. He asks not to rush and to let him finish speaking, for he is sure that Anna is held captive somewhere very close. As soon as he says this, the creature's single eye suddenly widens. Its situation sharply worsens and fear flashes in its restless, fear-clenched gaze. The burden of defeat crushes her and the follower begins to sob. All her thoughts are overwhelmed by sheer fear. Incompetence shattered the grand plans of her master, Bigades. She trembles at the terrible thought. The master will push her away. She keenly watches his every move and feels with indifferent slowness show he unfolds her torments. The sword researcher kneels down and, calling her by name, makes a last attempt to extract information before everything spins even more. Beneath him, a complex magical seal ignites. The mimic immediately leaps up. Driven by inner fear, and it bursts into desperate, fanatical determination. She declares she is ready to sacrifice him to regain her master's favor. Her comrades rush there at the shout just as a sudden surge of enemy energy rolls in. A mighty hand woven from vine and roots of the tree lunged forward and struck him, gripping so tightly that his bones went numb. The trap sprung with such furious speed that he didn't even have time to blink. He was already being jerked into the air. He shouts a warning to his allies and waves his hand, demanding they stay away so that the projected spell does not cover them while it unfolds in space. His face is twisted into a dead, insane smile, and the elf companion realizes in panic. A super-powerful teleportation ritual has been launched. A blinding pillar of light bursts from the circlate, devours everything within its radius. When the glow finally fades, the swordsman vanishes from sight, and his comrades frantically break the silence with shouts, calling his name. No sooner had the dazzling glow of the teleportation spell faded than Ali Zai flipped in the air and landed heavily on the forest floor. Shaking off disorientation, He turned his head toward the darkness between the trees and wondered on the move whether the spell had thrown him back into the thicket, or if this place was much more dangerous. Breaking free from the thickets, he found himself on the shore of a quiet body of water. The fog lay over the water as if the very air had frozen in a breath. To the left stood an old, worn sign, once nailed unevenly. The place was marked as the Lake of Lamentation. That inscription carried an ancient anxiety that pressed heavily against the chest. His chest tightened sharply the moment he noticed a familiar object in the grass, the dagger Lil Yun. The realization hit his head as if someone had struck him from the inside. The demon's plan was not only to capture him, they sought to sever his connection with his comrades, cutting off the path to them. He hissed a curse at his own foolishness, recalling how Lebetokas had laughed at him, saying he should have taken Riaya Arcana with him instead of facing the threat alone. His entire face was drawn by a sharp splash above the water. Monstrous Gagatas rose towering, and their huge silhouettes were clearly outlined against the dazzling light. Nearby, the corrupt Lebetokas was stealthily approaching, with a twisted reverence on her face, shouting to her master in an eerily cheerful tone. He froze, his breath caught in his throat as soon as he recognized the demonic knight. The same Gagatas, whom he was sure had already been finished off, appeared before his eyes and struck his chest with pure shock. Now he looked at his enemy completely differently, realizing what endurance he might be capable of. He stood still, watching as the demon knight did not move. Before his eyes, the body contracted back while he continued to draw powerful mana from the lake. It immediately became clear this place was his refuge for recovery. Here the very atmosphere nourished his dark regeneration. Crouching and pressing himself to the ground behind a thick tree trunk, he scanned with his eyes as Lebetokas boasted about her own luck in all directions. She called out to Gagatas with a smile, saying she had already brought the uncle he demanded, and her voice stretched out like a poisonous mirage, one that sent chills down his skin. And at that moment he firmly understood. In this dark scheme he was not the executor but the very prize. She could only freeze in pure horror. She sharply turned her head and revealed the disgusting extent of her own corruption. The tree had fused with her flesh, turning into a nightmarish sight. Despite the grotesque change on her face, the same wide, seemingly innocent smile remained. She turned to Agatas, asking if it had turned out well, and essentially begged for praise. This bloody contrast exposed how irreversibly her former self had disappeared. She shudders as the demon knight looms over her face. His voice chills right on the spot, and he orders her to say who she imagines herself to be. He aims his words at the very essence. His orders boiled down to one thing: to deliver a message. But she put all her precious strength into teleportation magic to get here. And now the truth opens up to her, causing her eyes to widen and her fingers to start trembling. His anger flares as he begins to explain. This magic burns a colossal amount of mana which he had already given her. She tries to break free from a trembling, apologetic phrase, but he sharply cuts off her words, stopping her mid-sentence. His patience snapped. He was not looking for her pity, he demanded only an answer. From a safe shelter nearby in the forest belt, a young man watches the conversation closely and suddenly sees the afflicted girl writhe right before his eyes, convulsively gasping for air. It immediately becomes clear to him. The connection between these two monsters is far from stable. The demon knight continues to shower reproaches, pointing a finger at his interlocutor and stating that the path from Arcana should have taken half a day. Her haste nullifies the calculations. The human pursuer arrived too early, and her own regeneration has not yet fully recovered, only half completed. He demands an answer on how she intended to cover such a waste of power. She clutches her words pleadingly, her voice breaking and trembling with despair. She stubbornly insists that she has only one desire: to be useful to her master. But he, without changing his tone, indifferently and mockingly reduces everything to just that one word. He mercilessly declares that he no longer needs her. A moment and a fierce blow knocks her off her feet. She falls unconscious. He thrusts his hand into her and instantly ends her existence with a cold, harsh push. She wheezes, choking on her own blood, and he cuts her off with words. Her thoughts are worthless, and he orders her to die. He leaned over the creature, trembling in fear, and his voice barely dripped with cold contempt. He thundered aloud, asking why she could not simply follow the order, and branded her a defective tool that failed to fulfill its purpose. With harsh ruthlessness, he cut off. Now she was only emergency fodder, and ordered her to immediately return the mana he had given her. As the grip tightens, the distorted girl can no longer break free or breathe deeply. Wet, suffocating wheezes escape her throat, one eye wide open in fear. She stretches her body forward as if searching for an exit in the air, and her consciousness collapses into a single tangled knot, pleas for forgiveness and salvation. But her screams shatter against the silenced essence that made up her life, begins to forcibly take her away. Suddenly the blade snatches the silence of the air. Elias lunged forward, and he could no longer endure this terrible retribution. His strike comes instantly. He aims at the demon's hand, but the creature barely moved, only fixed the warrior with a gaze that spewed boundless boredom. The stunned young man rasped, How could he act so cruelly and mercilessly toward the one he once called daughter? He approaches the girl who is trembling and almost whispers as he tries to understand her pain. She stares at him, her face frozen in a mask of pity and shamelessness, while he asks why she is suffering and what exactly happened to her. He says as soon as he saw her, his own daughter flashed in his mind she was once a slave too. It was the memory that did not let him stop. The decision flew instantly, without hesitation, and the body moved forward even before the mind could catch up. He was driven by a fatherly instinct, one goal, to snatch and protect. His words brought tears that streamed down her face as soon as she dared to name her deepest desire. She only longed for one thing: to be pulled out of the darkness that was devouring her from within. Loneliness, heavy as a stone, and the gnawing of flesh spilled out along with her sobbing. She feels a barely perceptible palm on her head he touches gently, as if handing her a drop of relief. He vows to find a way to save her and asks her to hold on tight and not lose heart even when it seems there is no way out and strength is running out. His attempts to lift her spirits are cut short by the cold voice of Demon Knight. The uninvited guest sharply clarifies whether she even understands how critical her situation is, and what her existence truly means looms over them like a dark omen. He sends a direct command precisely in a cold tone without any emotional crack. She is ordered to kill Alizai. The girl's eyes widen in a flash. She suddenly clearly realizes that the task is insurmountable. The burden of the order falls on her shoulders, slowly breaking her spirit, and the gaze of the knight does not let Gotchind and merciless. He is riveted by the sight of her seemingly curling inward. Her body twitches, pushed out by the pressure of the command. The knight stands still and does not retreat. It orders her to act immediately and complete the task, regardless of the inner conflict tearing her apart from within. Under the pressure of the order, she begins to convulse, her body shakes, and everything in her physically changes. Nearby, a man powerlessly watches as corruption takes power again. The skin thickens and turns into bark, and humanity drifts away, vanishing completely. She sobbed, and her face twisted into a silent agonic eruption, clenched in its final convulsions what was still human. Tears streamed down her cheeks like a river, and this flow painfully contrasted with the torn wooden growths that relentlessly devoured her features. Snapping at her despair, Alice's companion looked back at Gageta and began pleading for her life. He insisted. There was no point in killing. Hirsch could be taken captive and turned into a valuable hostage. Gageta listened to him without the slightest sign of emotion on his face and agreed just as calmly, with a dry confirmation. As soon as the man blinked, the Demon Knight lunged forward and issued a verdict. Either her husband would kill him or he himself would perish. The comrade barely managed to jump aside. A deadly blow thundered through the air exactly where he had stood a moment ago. Clenching his teeth in powerless irritation, he caught the thought. A direct assault would achieve nothing. Even with a severely disfigured face and hand, this creature still looked almost invincible until its magical reserves were revealed. He sharply turned his gaze to the struggling girl. His voice broke toward Labatakis with frantic, desperate tension. The man demanded an answer, what she truly desired for herself, forcing her to make a decision: to accept her own fating or to acknowledge the monster she was already becoming. She could only stammer from nervousness. Her thoughts were tearing apart and memories were fading. Noticing her freeze, the man instantly embraced her and gently pressed her to himself, gathering her fragile, trembling figure into his arms. His decision cut through the complete chaos around them. He thundered an order to retreat immediately. Despite the confusion among the people nearby, he still kept one thing in mind: staying meant inevitable death for both of them. While they fled, he kept his voice low and confident, calmly revealing that she needed a pause to weigh everything and find her own path. He noticed her inner struggle whether to remain a demon or choose another way of existence, and ultimately made the decision to give her a chance. He bursts through the forest, and the weight of the girl in his arms constantly reminds him of the choice he made. He urges her to hold on with her thoughts in this moment, promising to keep danger away as long as he has strength and time. To his feverish movements, she responds without hesitation in a sharp tone. It seems he has lost his mind. He twitches from tension, then can no longer hold back and blurts out, or maybe she is really looking for a fight. And she only quietly turns over in her mind the thought, is this exactly how father felt about that chaotic security? Suddenly she asks, put me on the ground. He freezes for a fraction of a second, confused by the sharp shift in her mood, then finally agrees and firmly assures that he will manage. She gently places her on the forest ground. She takes a few cautious steps and checks whether her own weight holds and how the ground responds under her bare feet. Meanwhile, he watches her, a mixture of apprehension and curiosity in his eyes. Without any pauses, she breaks the silence with a wild attack of fierce, brutal rage. Her fists strike the air and the ground with icy, terrifying force. He freezes in stunned stillness while she roars, shouting her defiance to the world that has distorted her. Her rage does not let go. She growls so that the air vibrates and proclaims, "No, she is not a pitiful monster, nor an emergency patch that can simply be thrown away." With every blow, the earth trembles, thereby confirming that the demonic power still beats, running through her fragile body. When the storm of her anger subsides, she turns to him with astonishing clarity and announces her decision: to stay close. These sharp, unexpectedly direct words knock him off his feet, especially the phrase that finishes him off completely. Now he must take full responsibility for her. He remains in denial, but she instantly cuts off his words. The tension in her gaze eases, her face softens, and in this softness hides vulnerability. She honestly admits, as a demon, she has nowhere else to turn. Even more terrifying is the thought that she will have to remain completely alone. She cannot bear this fate. He spoke quietly and urged her to stay closer. The lonely isolation when she was left alone pressed much harder than anything else he could imagine. Bending his arm, he pressed his palm to her head, a brief touch of support that drew a sincere smile from her, though a painful one. The silence cracked and shattered instantly as soon as she felt he was near. It was a sign for him they had already been exposed by the one she called uncle. A huge, gnarled grapevine breaks loose from above and, tumbling down, covers their running back while he himself screams a warning. Attack from above. When the wooden tentacles struck in turn, he immediately recognized the same bonds that had previously squeezed Lillian, and at that moment Lillian finally understood. This was not a minor power, but the true scale of the demon knight's strength. He could control not only creatures but the very forest around. Breaking out of the shadows, the giant figure of Agatas revealed his plan: how to reduce his own body to a slimy form, merge with the flora, and take it under control. He mocked the very idea, as if a monster could come to terms with a human. The warrior instantly drew his blade, dashed forward, and managed to place it under the next sweeping strike of the animated tree, deflecting the attack midair. She whispered an apology, as if blaming their reconnaissance on her own old flashes, and he dismissed her guilt and immediately turned back to the demon. It sneered contemptuously, exposing his weakness to mockery, and challenged him to a fight. He steadily draws his blade, tapping calm confidence into the trembling eyes of the girl to whom he had earlier promised to take everything upon himself. His voice does not break, although the threat is already looming close, and he brushes off her previous cry of alarm as if it were merely a distracting maneuver. He sharply turns toward her and acts as if despair is tearing off his brakes. He gives the order: take the weapons and flee immediately. He presses on the fact that she must survive even if it means leaving him alone so that he himself can stare down the danger. He presses the hilt into her palm and says, "This sword is a pass to safety. If she passes it to Lillian, she will definitely be believed." But the girl only freezes, overwhelmed by shock, and her name cannot escape. It is stuck in this feeling, like a cramp in the chest. Catching her slight hesitation, he slowly touches her head with his hand. It is easier to calm and maintain balance this way. She clings tightly to him, tears running down her cheeks, and a plea sounds in her voice: do not separate them. She cannot come to terms with the thought of leaving him aside right now. He holds her gaze steadily, not averting his eyes, and says without any hesitation, "This is not the end yet." He swears that he will find a way back to her even if the battle ahead erases him. Confidence bubbles in his heart. A promise is not a fragile sound, but chains that pull across the distance. A strong bond that connects two souls in one chain, no matter how much the world falls apart. He solemnly extends to her his most precious thing, a symbol of faith that she will live and survive. He drinks in her gaze the turn, that last, painfully sad look, and rushes headlong into the forest. The heavy sword is pressed tightly to his chest, and behind him his lonely silhouette, like a barrier ready to block the path of the demon who is already approaching. Disappearing among the trees, the demon knight clicks his tongue maliciously and immediately grasps the meaning. That man deliberately pushed away his only support of defense to let it slip from his hands and allow her to escape. The knight does not restrain his mockery of that mad behavior, trying to understand why someone would risk their own life for a creature of darkness. But the man is silent. There is nothing left to deny. His decision was made long ago. He silently watches as the man stops, thinking about the girl he just sent away, and notes Lebatoka's shone in his eyes with the same terrifying expression as in all those he has already saved. He recalls the faces of the girls: Akin's forced smile, Mia's submission, and Lillian's icy, deeply rooted distrust. They were all united by one thing: the same emptiness in their eyes, the gaze of a person whose heart has already been shattered and who since then cannot believe in anything. Tearing away his last will, he burns out his verdict with fierce confidence. He says that he himself is their father. Holding Lebatoka now is for him an inevitable betrayal of the family he has already called his own. His phrase firmly pins the night demon in place, and it swallows the weight of this command. The man challenges. How can he even look others in the eye again if he turns his back on one of Themen, the moment of need right now? He is clearly stunned by the audacity of that man, and his confusion only intensifies because he feels everything around starting to shift. The man screams hoarsely, orders him to listen carefully, then presses with a thought. It is his own position that determines who he is. His scream momentarily throws the demon off its mask. Genuine shock flashes across the demonic face, and only now does realization slowly dawn. He repeats these words a second time, whispering, as if feeling for their meaning, trying to understand how some ordinary man could proclaim such kinship with those five. He freezes and watches as the man growls in response. His voice rolls like an echo and scatters like unwavering will. No matter what the surrounding world whispers to them, this is their father, and he will not back down a single step in this truth. Unshakable spirit envelops the demon with unusual clarity. He lowers his gaze down, and the features of his face gently become clear as he whispers that he has finally understood everything about this man's heart. He freezes on memories and runs through in his mind 5 girls who challenged everything that common sense taught. They looked like a pure anomaly, as the very force of nature that destroyed the inevitable reign of the Demon King just when the world was almost in his hands. It was a defeat that crossed out any calculations, an unthinkable result that no one in the demon realm could have imagined. This guest throws fire into sudden, explosive rage, and Jageta's eyes fixate tightly on the man standing right in front of him. He tears the silence with a scream, calling the stranger guilty of the root cause of all failure, single variable that shattered the demon's grand plan and turned their victory to ashes. His voice grows heavier, like the thunderous whirlpool of a 7th-century verdict, and with each word he methodically breaks down how ancient demonic ambitions and the legends of humanity were systematically shattered, step by step. He still cannot comprehend how a single person managed to nullify the legacy, on the blood of heroes and the erasure of histories, effectively cutting short the grand design of the demons. The demon utters the command, and a heavy, icy silence clings over the clearing. He pronounces a cold, irrevocable sentence: here a human life must end. Beside him, the warrior does not flinch. The grip on the blade grows even firmer, and the clash slowly approaches that deadly boundary. He tears a guttural roar from his chest and immediately triggers a grotesque transformation. His body convulses, enveloped by dark energy as he absorbs what remains of the fallen creature. This is a desperate final evolution from flesh, and ancient malice is born, a being destined to ensure the enemy's absolute destruction. When the evil process reaches its limit, the creature fixes its gaze on its enemy and suddenly sees everything in sharp, new clarity. It proclaims that it has finally reached the perfect form. This final transformation becomes the culmination of 700 years of demonic pursuit, a force forged precisely to reclaim the future stolen from its lineage. A giant monster of scales and wings looms over the man as a complete nightmare. Its presence exudes a deadly intent. The man swears that the end of the path will come right here and firmly promises, allies will fall by his hand in this very place. Lil Yun stands alone in the forest, and each of her breaths breaks off abruptly as the air suddenly surges with a fierce tremor of magical energy in a wave. Far away in the battle zone, the atmosphere seems to buckle under its own weight. There, the power awakens and presses on everything around. She trembles, her face pales, and cold sweat appears on her skin. Suddenly, her mind clarifies what might have happened, and this realization strikes her like a tangible shock. Finally, Gagetes releases his true, terrible maybe. At that moment, all her thoughts flee to the man fighting for her. In her mind forms a trembling prayer for only one thing: to keep him safe. She is driven by fear and hope at the same time. She breaks into a run through the dark trees, not letting go of the thread of memory, his promises, the silent oath that he will break any enemy. Everything else she cuts off from herself and does not allow doubts to enter. All that remains for her is his inevitable return to her. The man still stands his ground, holding back the nightmare that turned into flesh. Gageta has already shed his human form, his body swells, and a dragon-like creature covered in scales and bare, furious rage grows from him. The swordsman grips the hilt even tighter and understands without words: the real battle has just begun. He leaps forward swiftly, and the blade flashes as if woven from deadly intent. Behind this attack lies their own story, one threat for two, a fate that forces them toward a bloody finale. He lets out a guttural roar and challenges, declaring this the final clash that will end it all. He sharply leans forward and makes a measured strike with the blade, aiming directly at the massive legs of the monster. His calculation is flawless. The mightiest monster becomes vulnerable as soon as it loses movement. The steel penetrates deeply into the body, and for a moment it seems as if victory is very close. He grits his teeth and puts every last drop of determination into each strike, trying to turn the demon's course. But Gagetes stands unmoved. He only lowers his gaze downward in icy indifference, frozen in it, and his voice rumbles dully as he mocks the futility of these attempts. The man involuntarily twitches with fear, and the deep wound disappears in a single short flash. The seals on the demon's leg also stretch the skin, contracting back. Blood and flesh merge as if they had never been touched. The realization that his enemy is almost immortal lies heavy like lead in his stomach as the beast tensely prepares to respond. He barely manages to react when a huge inflated tail whips behind him. A swingan suddenly it covers him completely. Realization hits like a shock. His body is gripped by a surge of adrenaline. Yet just a moment ago, this could not have been, at least that's how it seemed to him. Fixing his gaze on his teeth, he concludes. The beast hid its tail behind a thick trunk standing nearby. In despair, he begins to frantically scan the clearing, but the demon has already disappeared from sight, leaving behind an empty search for a target that does not actually exist. Suddenly, the creature's snout appears almost right in front of him, just a few inches away. Its low growl cuts through the air and trembles for a moment, then disappears again. Fear grows. He stubbornly feels that the demon reads every one of his movements. From the first blow, which hits him straight in the forehead, he loses consciousness for only a moment, but the next instant the creature emerges behind him with incredible speed and pushes him forward. The next attack throws him off balance. Boots scrape through the mud, and he tears a muffled cry of defiance from his chest. The desperate onslaught allows no Pausino time to breathe or gather himself to respond with a counterattack. Using the thicket around, the demon dissolves into a blurred gray figure with dark wings and sinks between the trunks like a predator that has measured every step. His movements are calculated to the smallest detail. He confuses the fencers and pushes them only to defense. He freezes, preparing for a direct strike, and keeps his gaze forward, but there is no one there, only empty air. Cold sweat appears on his forehead. He has been used as bait again, while the real danger hides very close, just out of his sight. As the air whistles behind him, he sharply turns around, trying to save himself with some kind of parry in a desperate step. But when it happens again, the very strategy confuses him. This is a deadly game of cat and mouse, where he is definitely the prey. Finally, he assembles the puzzle of that trick. The demon weaves between the trees, swinging its limbs and fueling the impulse to trace these high-speed flanking maneuvers. Fatigue grows, but he holds on, enduring a barrage of blows, while the beast hurls mocking praise for his stubborn refusal to fall. He knelt down and gasped for air, breaths breaking as his gaze slid over the wounds. It turned out that there had been no escape from that very previous clash and the damage inflicted. As soon as Gagatas felt consciousness returning, he immediately spoke boastfully, revealing the source of his power. The demon admitted, once he had tried to fully restore his physical form, for him there was a gift that melted like his slime. But in the end, he abandoned that path of bodily perfection, replacing it with a single goal. And squeezing out a cold, mocking smile to surely finish off the swordsman, he emphasized. The current form was deliberately assembled so that his own corrosive fluids would not eat away the flesh, complete, cold-blooded, calculated evil. With cold pleasure he watched as the swordsman slowly rose, and it looked like confirmation. The demon's strike had such weight that even the force of the last push revealed its colossal power. The swordsman understood the main thing: the enemy's threat was based not only on brute physical strength, but on an icy alloy of confidence and tactical calculation. The demon himself knew perfectly well what he was capable of, and immediately put this knowledge into the necessary actions. He grew to full height, filling the space as if his presence hung over everything around, and showed the cunning by which he saw through human intentions. Therefore, every move of his was not just executed, it was carried out with deadly wisdom. Aya's tactical skill was indisputable until suddenly a troubling thought pierced the swordsman's mind. Something had gone wrong. The feeling insidiously clouded his reasoning, and he froze, staring into the space ahead there. Despite the threat still hanging right before him, an inexplicable incongruity was felt, one he could not name. He stood motionless in the silence, concentrating so deeply that nothing remained except the thoughts rapidly cutting through his head as he analyzed his opponent. Before his eyes flashed that wild, untamed rage that Gagatas had shown earlier, a true, living anger without any pretense. And yet the fencer's instincts kept insisting, there was deceit here. Gagatas was weaving a web of deception, hiding his true intentions behind a mask of hostility. Suddenly, the air seemed to thicken and Gagata underwent a terrifying transformation. His figure turned into a much more primitive creature with a draconic essence. The incredible surge of strength was striking, and his forward lunge was so sharp that the man simply did not have time to recover. The demon with cold, indifferent hunting watched as his opponent convulsively tried to stay on his feet, and at that moment revealed himself. His power skillfully subdued the surrounding flora, allowing it to feed on his very own essence. Everything that man managed to strike, and every drop of blood that fell to the ground, only nourished the vines. Now they, like living snakes, frantically tear and slide under the demon's absolute command. The swordsman firmly gripped the hilt of his blade and suddenly realized, Gagatas fights desperately but precisely, just like an underdog who knows how to survive next to a stronger opponent. He did not rush forward blindly. The swordsman felt how he tried to consistently uncover and seize one single deadly gap, and he himself already understood. This man must be ready for anything that comes next. He fixed his gaze on the alarm signal as Gageta threw a small pulsating sphere into the air. At that moment it began to swell and twisted incredibly fast, nervously accelerating the distortion. The man tensed sharply, eyes wide open, watching a huge surge of energy build up inside this strange projectile. A deafening roar spread across the clearing as the orb suddenly flared and expanded into a colossal sphere of liquid it hung above the man like a tsunami frozen in midair. The man gasped in pure shock, his voice choking as he rasped the question, "How can such a massive, terrifying creation even exist?" His opponent with a bloody smile did not take his eyes off him and even explained, "The sphere is a giant slime that is about to burst and tear off the roof, releasing a stream of corrosive acid. No shelter nowhere to hide from that inevitable chemical downpour that will soon flood the entire area." He fixed his opponent with a cold and satisfied look as soon as the man's back slammed against the wall and the vines tightly blocked the way back. Gagetas solemnly declared the fight over, confident that his opponent had exhausted all moves and was now completely under his control. He fixes his gaze on the translucent height that lifts a mass of slime, and his thoughts rush while Lido somehow grasped the horror standing right before him. Despite how it looks, he notices, there is not a single leaf and this destroys the legend that she supposedly grew up in the demon forest. He sarcastically dismisses the doubts. Why invent such an outright falsehood if, according to her, the demon reveals a deliberate hidden design that is much deeper than the legend itself? Having shifted the weight, he froze with doubt. Was it a complete bluff to make him give change, or perhaps a desperate attempt to pin him down by force? He immediately dismisses the idea of a simple bluff, and without embellishment, recalls that rotted anger that Gagetes directed at him. At this very moment he clearly understands. Everything has turned out far too much in favor of the demon. While he is still trying to figure out the circumstances, suspicion grows stronger. Everything fits exactly as the demon planned. He realizes that by creating this dead pause, Gagetas is simultaneously giving a warning and continuing to control the course of the clash. A sudden guess strikes him sharply and widely opens his eyes in shock and almost whispers something unbelievingly. Nearby, opposite, Gageta clenches his teeth. Tension and a sense of impending disaster freeze on his face. He concludes the slime behaves like an unstable variable. Most likely, everything is falling apart due to a lack of magical energy. But he remembers, Gagetas would never miscalculate blindly. So he sets out to eliminate all risks and uncertainties while the demon seems to deliberately prolong the fight, waiting for that very moment. Finally, they shed light on the real reason for the delay. From the darkness behind Gagetes emerges his second iron giant Gushia, a colossal demonic presence. He was confident down to the last detail. Victory was already in his hands. He had outpaced his own unit like a runner, and he himself staged a full-scale assault. Now he knew for sure Alize would have no chance to snatch victory. Holding his breath and not breaking the pace, he caught up with Gigaitas at the right moment, loudly declaring that their final confrontation was next. He caught a barely noticeable smile on the demon's face and immediately realized. This was a clash held on the edge of willpower, where the first to lose control would lose everything. When the tension began to rise, he caught how sharply the air changed. This meeting had nothing to do with the ones before. On the horizon, something new and deadly dangerous was approaching, and the demon mask looked even more terrifying. Hearing that the growing evil was being answered, he threw at the demon. There will be no more time for preparation. Gagetas twitched from the shock, and his cold composure instantly cracked as soon as he realized these plans were destroying his intentions. He stopped looking at the demon's torment, crookedly stretched his lips into a smile, and sharply mocked Agyatas as if his meticulously detailed plan had completely fallen apart. Then he said, "The true nature of a person always reveals itself as soon as they are driven into a dead end." In an instant, the demon began to disintegrate. Liquid burst out in a chaotic splash, and he begged desperately just to wait. The character stood motionless, fixated on this moment and breathing hoarsely from exhaustion, while the once formidable enemy crumbled right before him. When the storm finally subsided, he glanced at his own hand-transparent drops were rolling off his fingers one by one. He was seized by a twitch. In fact, it was just ordinary water. When the demon's remains melted in the distance, he was struck with surprise. How swiftly the creature dared to retreat. As soon as the deception was exposed and the enemy fled, he was left alone amid all the consequences. Exhausted, the young girl breathes heavily on the edge of her strength and still manages to run right to the edge of the forest. Just a little more and her goal is already very close. She lowers her gaze to the sprawling Grad Arc, and there is both relief and stubborn determination in it. Somewhere in her mind, she measures the path again. Gageta, by her calculations, stretches at most half a day's journey, and yet she managed to gain time by rushing forward through treacherous cliffs and cutting through the raging rivers that rush ahead. She calculates this. If you do not follow the winding path and go straight through the wild thicket 7, despite the danger, you will reach the goal much faster. Pushing the last remnants of strength from her body, she slowly slides down the steep rocky slope. Her fingers have already darkened, covered with a strange corrosion. Pressing her palms to the ground to keep her balance, she rushes further and further to where the one she seeks awaits her. Her sharp impulse is suddenly cut off. Her legs buckle, trembling does not let go. When she falls, fear overwhelms her completely, and in her head the same thing spins madly: guilt for what she has already done and a terrible unknown, whether anyone will ever believe her and whether they will trust her again. She lowers her gaze to the sword firmly gripped in her palms. This weight presses not only on her hands. When the thought manages to strike her mind, despair surges like a wave. No matter how much she tries to explain everything in detail, the world will probably still reduce her actions to a simple, ordinary deed. She chokes on tears and calls her husband, the very one she considers her uncle, begging him to lead her through this nightmare. But one moment of grief is interrupted by the appearance of a blonde elf woman. She emerges right among the shadows of the trees. The elf swiftly draws her sword with a ringing metallic clang, aims it at the alien, and orders him to stop immediately. She froze with her gaze as the girl disappeared into the forest, while a fog of doubts thickened in her mind. So what kind of creature was before her? A real demon? And then how did he manage to hold that very sword? She waited advantageously for the figure that was fleeing until it reached the foot of a huge tree. There, curled up in a ball, sat a creature trembling with fear. The harsh reality cut through the gaze. A demon should not look so vulnerable and certainly cannot hold a weapon that belongs to Ali's egg. The girl convulsively exhaled a frightened breath just as the shadow of the warrior covered her, and in her eyes flashed the pure, raging terror of a trapped animal. She tried to take a deep breath. Her lungs protested, her body jerked upward from the pain, while her gaze clung to the elf. The warrior was already in a battle stance but did not dare move. Her hand froze next to her own weapon, and her eyes did not look away as the girl died in despair. The warrior woman sat down to the level of the girl, and her voice softened as she asked if Ali Zai had handed her the sword. The question made the girl even more confused. Her thoughts jumbled together and immediately fell apart, turning uncertain and shaky. Her eyes suddenly filled with tears. The weight of what she had done finally broke her. Between heavy, ragged sobs, she still blurted out a confession about the terrible thing. Her voice trembled with panic. The fear that the warrior would not believe her did not let go. She had simply stolen valuable weapons. The elf slipped a soft, soothing smile and dispelled the girl's anxiety with words that stealing her sword would be impossible under any circumstances. She emphasized, this very blade was once given to Themen to themselves be Alizai. Then she revealed a stunning truth that made the girl hold her breath for a moment and unable to utter a single sound. It turned out, before them was Lady Aliz's daughter. And just a few seconds passed, the terrible clash dissolved before their eyes, changing into a sudden deep closeness that no one expected. She utters an explanation. Stealing her mother's sword would be impossible, so there was only one option: passing it from hand to hand. A man flashes in her memory, extending the blade, calling it his most precious possession. Salvation comes in a wave. The broken girl is covered with force and she presses the weapon to her chest. Tears roll down her face until she finally realizes what she is holding in her hands. Peeking into the child's suffering, she gently persuades her to speak, eager to know for sure what happened to Lady Alize. The girl pieces together words through waves of sobbing. A memory from the past breaks back and presses down with pain again. Her pain knows no bounds. She laments that her uncle was left alone, and that it happened because of her. Because of guilt for her transformation and for all the events that followed, now settling heavily on her soul. While the rest continues somewhere aside, deep in the forest, a man with a stubbly chin swiftly makes his way through the underbrush. He stops for a moment. His face turns cold like stone as he coldly assesses the state of his enemy. In his thoughts, he concludes, the spirit of Gageta was most likely broken in their last clash, and along with that, Gaida's will to continue fighting has already faded. Without sport and without hunting the fallen enemy he still understands well, the demonic knight cannot be let go. It is a firm necessity. Leaving the threat alive, the cycle of violence will never truly end. Memories of simple days, the father's muffled laughter and the daughter's warm smile flare up in his head, only to collide immediately with the present reality, where blood and betrayal reign. The elf stood motionless, accepting the path of pain that led them right here to where so many people were trampled and wronged. He squints, cold confidence in every movement. Knowing exactly where this coward disappeared to, he sets about unraveling the tangle of fabrications that squeeze the web of their battle, reaching for the truth. He silently froze, immersed in thought, and dismantled the deceptions that Gojta wove into the course of the fight. The demon relied on two main lies: the the deceptive image of a gigantic physical body and the bluff of the invincibility of this form, which he reinforced with continuous regeneration. This jolt revealed to him a deeper truth. Gadgetas was burning through his own magical reserves, pulling his wounds together, so every blow he tried to take on himself actually drained his life force. It became clear why the demon did not release traces of dissolution abilities. His own mana was already gasping, exhausted to the limit. He realized, as soon as the secret of his power is revealed and disappears, the demon's invincibility will also collapse. To maintain the mask, Vegeta's main task will be to find where to draw replenishment from, and only one logical place remained for a creature driven into a dead end. His search ended on the shores of the Lake of Sorrow. Once a formidable demon, he once sat right by the water itself, broken outside, his strength clearly knocked out. He raised his blade over the trembling creature. The blade swallowed a dim glow. Gaida jerked back in pure shock. His voice broke, turning into a broken whisper as he gasped out the name, Ali Zai. He could not comprehend how they tracked him down and brought him all the way to this protected, secluded refuge. He maintained the attack pace without Poseshi's face remained stone cold, without any emotion, while his eyes fixed on how horror deadened the demon's features. He aloud emphasized how pitiful it looked, cast away from its grand illusions, reduced to a trembling beast. He paid no attention to the demons who stubbornly kept their distance and stayed behind and did not flinch even once. Calmly he said, to destroy an enemy who no longer wishes to fight is an everyday matter, but he wants to arrange Vegeta's death as befits a warrior, regardless of whether he was a monster or someone else. Then, without retreating, he demanded the fallen count fulfill his last promise. A man stands over a fallen enemy, calm on his face but iron determination. He says, if the demon manages to promise that it will never harm any person again, then there is no point in ending its life right here. He continues to press with words that he alone will bear the full weight of this decision, while Gaida's is meanwhile enveloped by a silent pause. He stands and looks back confused, bewildered, trying to understand why such a proposal is even being made. This confusion instantly turns into a white-hot rage. The demon's eyes narrow, and a growl bursts from his chest as if someone mercilessly offended his dignity. He wildly puffs up his lungs and roars, demanding, let him name exactly which empty promise they demand from him, specially if he is sure that this very man sent killers to strike at the Demon King. The demon does not quiet down, continues tearing into his tirade, branding the man as the true enemy of his master. The man tries to resolve the misunderstanding, but his explanations scatter as if hitting a deaf wall. Vegeta instantly read the cruelty of the clash and realized, although he fought mercilessly and held on to confidence in his own power, only one phrase ended him. After such a humiliating defeat, he is pushed into the abyss, and it crushes him from within. Is on the verge of an explosion, growling and demanding an answer. Is he really forced to live on the crumbs of deceitful promises? He declares that his life is humiliated, and death is the only dignity he has left. A heavy sigh bursts from the man's chest as he lowers his gaze to the broken warrior. He finally closes his eyes and whispers an extremely desperate plea for the decisive blow. He drinks in the gaze, like that man who, without unnecessary movements, sticks out his tongue in the child's refusal, dry and remarkably clearly. He cuts off the request for the warrior's end. Demon Kitsar rushes towards him with a confused exclamation, but in a moment of shock convulsion changes his face to white hellish rage. He growls, as if saying this is some kind of crazy prank, and the man immediately turns away. He catches a raised male voice. It lays out intentions clearly. Supposedly, he came for the girls and does not at all intend to become an executioner for the villain. The defeated knight catches the moment when a new realization sparks within him and disdainfully begins to draw a conclusion. The refusal was not born from a moral choice, it was squeezed out by a simple lack of capability. He does not cease the verbal pressure. He states that a wooden sword for execution is a senseless tool, and at the same time realizes that his own magical power will awaken again in this forest over time, so the chance for recovery will indeed appear. Each time he tears the air with an even louder scream, throwing accusations at the silent man. He hides behind morality, conceals his own weakness, and is still unable to see the matter through to the end. His body seems to lock up from shock when the man disappears in a moment, leaving behind a barely perceptible trace of movement, while the demon rider, staggering, retreats in complete frenzied madness. He is left alone in the silence of the forest, frozen with his gaze in an empty spot where just a moment ago the mysterious warrior stood, and he could not imagine where he might have gone. He is suddenly overcome by confusion. A sharp blade presses into his throat, and in a moment he already realizes how easily he can be broken. Then behind him appears a man. The cold blade of the dagger Elias presses into the skin so tightly that the demon gasps, and the man sharply warns, move even once and death will catch you immediately. He says that a special magical seal is engraved on this blade. It is connected to a transfer spell that was already used on Labatokas, so the demon will not be able to simply ignore this threat. Continuing the explanation, he states, the demon's body is only a dense cluster of magical energy, and this blade was made to initiate a continuous outflow until all that power is exhausted to the limit. But Vegeta, stubborn, disdainfully snorts in his thoughts. Some pathetic trick will not be able to end his life even if the blade has not yet lost readiness to strike him. The man, glancing at the dense greenery, notices they are already deep inside the forest where nature turns hostile against beings of pure magic. He points to the magic-binding vines stretching into the undergrowth. Their stems are tightly intertwined, and they eagerly await a source of power to devour it. He further explains, even if Gogeta has already broken free from the first physical chains, these vines still begin to tighten the circle. They are ready to consume any magic he releases. At first, the plan seemed like a simple solution. Let the forest swallow him until he finally vanishes into nothingness. Such an end is much more irreversible than a usual execution. As soon as he moves back, the demon, shrill and wildly enraged, demands an answer as to why he was spared, and shouts after him. Confusion and mad rage are tangled in this voice. He throws a claim at the man about logic. Why leave the enemy alive at all? And the man simply moves further away, leaving the demon alone with his questions and with the power that slowly returns. While the air still trembles with hissing and the promise echoes as if a demon will hunt again, the man merely gives a brief smile, steady, precise, and brushes off the threat as if it has no right to exist. He recalls his past. Then he was a reckless youth until he encountered a master who revealed to him the true path of the sword and turned his life inside out. Finally, he hints, even in the harshest places here, there is a chance to find a new purpose. His thoughts roll back to the moment when he was beaten so brutally that his body barely obeyed. A devastating defeat that shattered his pride and touched an obsession in him to definitely surpassed the one who proved stronger. Staring intently at the demon, he admits, in this creature he sees a reflection of his own younger, arrogant self. Perhaps he even hopes that after such a terrible loss, the demon of darkness will be able to choose a different path. He intercepts the blade with his hand, but his voice does not waver as he delivers his final warning. In one sentence, everything is laid out clearly. As long as the demon refrains from further acts, his life remains his own, but the moment he breaks the rule, Agendeath will come instantly. When he turns his back, the demon knight shudders. His fingers clench into fists so tightly that the knuckles whiten, and rage intertwines with humiliation in his chest. He swears to make himself even stronger to restore his shattered pride and make that man regret his mercy. He tears his chest with a hoarse roar that rolls through the trees, and declares that he intends to find Alizea. His voice thickens with the same sharpened, vengeful determination. The wheezing in his chest did not break the swordsman. Through the roar he cast back only one glance, quiet, barely smiling, as if understanding everything, and as if casually said goodbye to the demon and vanished into the thick greenery. Behind him, the demon froze in place, as if stunned by the silence of the forest. He struggled to understand what exactly was raging inside this incomprehensible mixture of feelings. While he buries himself in his own thoughts, a pair of predatory eyes peer out from the shadows in the underbrush. They watch him closely as the man retreats deeper and deeper into the forest. They became a loud prophecy of the massacre ahead, a prologue to the clash that the fighter understood only later, for it was just beginning to unfold then. As soon as he moved forward, distant shadows of ancient and future battles twitched before his eyes, a bandaged monstrosity and a mysterious man in glasses. Both were bound to one goal: to find Alize.